Hi everyone. If you're new, welcome aboard. If you're a regular, welcome back. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Let me know in the comments. Now relax and enjoy the stories. I really dislike telling this story, not just because of how deeply unsettling it was for me, but because it also serves as a reminder of how much time has passed. My therapist has encouraged me to find the silver lining in things, so I've learned to cope by adding some dark humor. This took place in the early 90s, and I was about 16, almost 17, working as a regular babysitter in my neighborhood. My parents made it clear that the only way I was going to get a car was if I saved up for the down payment myself. So, every afternoon after school, I would either tutor kids or babysit, doing whatever I could to save up. There was one couple, the Moores, who were particularly generous with their pay. On Valentine's Day, they asked me to watch their 6-year-old and 10-year-old so they could enjoy a night out. They promised they'd be back by 8 and handed me $50 for pizza, movies, and anything else the kids wanted. I asked the boys what they'd like to do, and both immediately suggested going to the local video rental store. I knew Blockbuster wasn't too far away, but I hesitated, saying I'd need to check with their mom first. This was back in the pre-cell phone era, so I had to look up the restaurant's number in a phone book and call them. The boys were so excited, I thought they might burst. It took about 15 minutes to reach their mom, who sounded a little flustered, wondering why I was calling just to take them to Blockbuster. "Fine," she said. "Just don't spend all their money and nothing rated R." I told the boys, and they jumped with joy, rushing to get their jackets. We left before it got dark and reached the rental store in under 10 minutes. It was nearly empty, with just the cashier and maybe a couple of other people there. "Pick out whatever you want," I said as I grabbed some candy and popcorn. The older boy came back first with a Disney sequel VHS and asked if it was okay. I told him yes, then asked where his younger brother was. He looked surprised, so we both started searching the aisles for him. For a moment, I thought he might be pulling some prank and hiding, but eventually, I found him at the edge of an aisle, chatting with a tall, thin man in a trench coat. As soon as I saw this guy, I got a weird vibe and grabbed the younger boy's hand. "Sorry, I hope he wasn't bothering you," I nervously told the stranger. He smelled funny, as if he hadn't taken a bath in a while, and he had this weird, crazy look in his eyes that told me he was trouble. I just had a feeling, and I desperately wanted to be wrong about it. So I yanked the kid away and berated him as we made toward the cashier. "What were you telling him anyway?" I asked. "Just that we was renting some movies, and that we was home alone," the kid said innocently. I don't know why that didn't make alarm bells go off in my brain right away, but I guess I was too busy paying for the movies and dragging them out of the store. When we were walking back toward their house, it finally registered what he had told me. "Did that man ask you if you were alone?" I asked. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, but I didn't want the kids to think I was worried. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone following us. "Yeah." He seemed friendly, asked a lot of questions about me. The younger boy responded. I picked up the pace and told them we needed to hurry back to their house. I was positive now that we were being followed. I remember I looked back several times to see where the man was, but every time it felt like he was just barely out of sight. He was a master of stealth, it seemed. Once inside their house, I slammed the door shut and was upset at the kid for being so ignorant. "Don't you ever talk to strangers. That man could have done you some serious harm." I remember thinking I should punish them both by having them go to bed early, but I had no idea how right I would be about my warning of the stranger. I glanced out the windows to see if I could spot him, and after calming down, I went ahead and let them pick a movie. I was also trying to convince myself that my paranoia had just been my imagination. Less than 10 minutes later, as we were watching the Angels in the Outfield movie, I heard a knock at the door that made me realize maybe I hadn't been cautious enough. I went to the front and peeked through the blinds, curious to see that no one was outside. My heart was pounding now as I thought I saw the man in the trench coat standing over near the bushes. I immediately told the boys to pull the blinds closed and then turn off the lights. Next, I started to hear the stranger banging on the windows with what sounded like a stick. Was he trying to frighten us? I remember wondering. If so, he was doing a stellar job because I was terrified. "Turn off the TV for now," "Let's get to the bedroom," I said. I remembered that the Moores had a house phone up in their master suite, so I was calmly trying to herd the kids there as this wacko kept rattling against the outside of the house. The kids were getting scared now, especially the youngest, and he was crying. "Be quiet. Don't be scared," I told him as we ran up to the bedroom. I told them both to be quiet as I reached for the phone, only to find that the line was disconnected. This is the moment when a real sense of panic and dread was starting to overwhelm me. It was just past 6:30, meaning that their parents would not be home for at least another 45 minutes. And now, with the phone lines down, I was positive that this stranger was going to try to break in and do us harm. Still, I insisted that they needed to remain quiet and calm. I got the older one to assist me in moving furniture to the front of the door as a blockade, just in case this guy broke in. It's a good thing I did, because about 20 minutes later, I heard the shattering of glass and realized that was precisely what he had decided to do. I told them both not to make a sound as I tried to listen to where the stranger was. The only thing about this whole experience I will never forget is that the stranger started to whistle for us, like he was looking for a dog. It was a loud, sharp, insistent whistle, and he kept saying, "Here, boy. Here, boy. Come here, boy." I swear I have never been more scared in my life. And I ordered the boys to hide under the bed as footsteps came up the stairs. I was pretty sure we were about to die. It happened just like a horror movie too. He was standing outside the door because I could see the silhouette of his shadow peeking under the master bedroom door. Then the blockade of furniture started to rattle as I heard him fiddle with it. He shook it violently for a while, but to no success, and then for another long, indescribably quiet moment, I thought maybe he had given up. The kids were trying their best to not squeal or scream or even cry, but it was so hard to be perfectly still. At any second, I knew he was going to be back. Then he slammed his body against the door, and it came slightly ajar. I remember jumping and holding the boys closer as he did it again, and then again, until at last he could squeeze in past the wedge furniture. All I could make out were his boots, dark leather ones caked in mud. He moved slowly across the room and sat on the bed, as if trying to figure out where we were hiding. Then he started whistling again, and I quickly covered the younger boy's mouth as he let a leash drop over the edge of the bed. Did he know we were here? What kind of strange fetish was this? He started pacing the room, first checking the closet. Then we heard the garage door downstairs. I can't describe how relieved I was. The stranger bolted downstairs, and moments later, I heard shouting, Mr. Moore likely spotting the man trying to escape. A few seconds after that, Mrs. Moore rushed into the bedroom, frantically calling out her children's names while searching for us. I was the first to crawl out and help the younger boy escape. She grabbed him, holding him so tightly. Downstairs, Mr. Moore was trying the landline again to call the police, but it wasn't working. Honestly, I thought the crazy guy might come back and cause more harm, so I stayed inside, not wanting to leave until my parents arrived. Mr. Moore thanked me for being brave and even gave me extra money for keeping his kids safe. My parents also said I had acted quickly and decisively, and that it could have ended much worse, but I didn't feel proud at all. For the next week, I struggled to sleep. The sound of a dog barking or a whistle would bring everything back, making me want to curl up and hide. It's only now, after years of therapy, that I can share the story. Sometimes I still wonder what might have happened if the parents hadn't shown up early. Would he have hurt or even killed us? The police never caught the man, so we'll never know. But I do know one thing. I stopped babysitting for wealthy families after that. I was house sitting for an older neighbor who had gone to visit her grandkids in another state for Thanksgiving. I wasn't going anywhere myself, long story, no need for sympathy. I actually prefer spending the holiday alone, so I agreed to help her out, especially since she had this sweet cat. My payment? Belly rubs for the cat, which I was more than happy to provide. Turned out to be a fairly nice couple of days. I spent my time paging through her old cookbooks, trying out some of the recipes, and just relaxing. But one night, things took a turn, and I seriously thought my good deed might cost me my life. On Thanksgiving night, I was just lounging on the couch with the cat, when I must have dozed off. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of the cat going wild, scratching at the back room and meowing like crazy. At first, I smiled because I'd never seen the cat so agitated, and I thought maybe it was just hungry. So I got up, went into the kitchen to feed it, and that's when I started hearing voices coming from the back of the house. I was already on edge, knowing our neighborhood wasn't the safest, and Thanksgiving is prime time for petty criminals. If they had noticed my neighbor's car wasn't there, they might have assumed the house was empty and didn't bother to check again. In that case, if I startled some armed intruder, it could end badly for me. The layout of all the rental properties is the same. You walk in through the front door into the living room, which opens to the kitchen with a counter separating the two. Down the hall, there are 2 bedrooms on either side with a bathroom or laundry room at the end. So I grabbed a knife from the counter, pulled out my phone to dial 911, and started creeping down the hallway, trying to locate where the voices were coming from. As I get closer, I hear one of the people freaking out in a whispered voice, which obviously had me even more scared because it meant that they were in a volatile state. I could barely make out what they were saying since they were behind a closed door in one of the bedrooms, but I remember the moment I realized that the voice sounded like it belonged someone real young, and it sounded like they were holding back sobs. This whole new instinct took over. I flung the door open and flipped on the light, more to see if anyone was hurt or needed help by that time. Then, I'm suddenly greeted by the sight of 2 kids in the room. Middle school kids who went to school across the street. It turns out they were in the process of robbing the place when I showed up, and they didn't want to go to jail. They thought that they'd be able to sneak away when I went to the bathroom or something, but chickened out because they didn't want to risk getting caught. They sat in that room for hours until nightfall so they could sneak out. It made me kind of sad though. They were kids and their life is going to be a lot more difficult now just because they wanted to be thugs. Still scared me a lot though, and it gave me a whole new meaning to Thanksgiving for me. Giving thanks that no one got hurt that night. People often talk about national parks as places of beauty, peace, and nature's unspoiled charm. But no one ever mentions how easy it is to get lost in them. Not just lost in the sense of wandering off the path, though that's troubling enough, but lost in a way that makes you question everything you thought you understood about the world. That's exactly what happened to me and my friends when we decided to take a short hike on one of the park's lesser-known trails. It was meant to be a simple day trip, a quick adventure before heading back to the campsite. But what we discovered in those woods was anything but simple. It was early autumn, and the trees were just beginning to change color. The air was crisp, the sky clear and blue, and the trail we chose was supposed to be an easy loop. One of those beginner-friendly paths that meanders past a creek and through a few scenic lookouts. There were 4 of us, me, my best friend Chloe, and 2 other friends, Jake and Emma. We'd all hiked before and weren't worried about getting lost or encountering any issues. After all, it was a marked trail, and the map made it seem easy to follow. We started off in good spirits, laughing, taking photos, and enjoying the beautiful day. The trail was peaceful, with only the sounds of birds and the occasional rustling of leaves beneath our feet. At first, everything was perfect. We stopped by the creek to skip stones, climbed up to a lookout for a better view, and joked about how we should have brought snacks because the hike wasn't tough at all. But somewhere along the way, things began to feel off. I can't pinpoint exactly when, but the forest seemed to grow thicker. The trees, which had been spaced out and easy to navigate, suddenly felt like they were closing in on us. The trail markers, the small blazes on the trees that were supposed to guide us, became harder to spot. It wasn't until we realized we hadn't seen one in a while that the unease began to settle in. "Are we still on the trail?" Jake asked, slowing down to scan the trees. His voice lacked its usual carefree tone, now tinged with uncertainty. Chloe, ever the optimist, waved him off. "We just need to keep going. The trail loops back eventually, right?" I glanced around, feeling the same unease. The problem was that the woods now looked the same in every direction. Just an endless stretch of tall trees, dense underbrush, and shadows. I didn't want to admit it, but a knot of anxiety was growing in my stomach. We hadn't passed another hiker in hours, and the light was beginning to fade. Emma, usually quiet, finally spoke up. I think we missed a turn or something. Shouldn't we have seen the creek again by now? Yeah, I agreed, my voice shaking more than I meant it to. Maybe we should turn back the way we came. Jake pulled out his phone to check the GPS, but we all knew what was coming next. No service, he said, shaking his head. And this map app isn't loading. Of course it wasn't. We were too deep into the park, and none of us had thought to bring a physical map. Classic mistake, right? Chloe took charge, like she always did in situations like this. Let's just keep moving forward. We'll hit the trail eventually. We all agreed, though none of us were feeling as confident as we had that morning. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, and the temperature was dropping fast. But there was something else too. Something more than just the fading light or the growing chill. The woods felt wrong. It's hard to explain, but it was like the forest was watching us. The birds had gone silent, and the usual sounds of wildlife had disappeared completely. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig underfoot felt amplified, like it was coming from something just out of sight. More than once, I glanced over my shoulder. Sure, I'd seen movement between the trees, but whenever I looked again, there was nothing. We should stop and figure this out, Emma said, her voice tight with worry. I don't like this, but Chloe kept moving forward. We're fine, Em. We just need to find the trail again. It's gotta be close. We trudged on for another hour, the light fading to a dusky orange. The deeper we went, the less familiar everything looked. It didn't help that the woods had started to feel unnatural. The trees were all the same height, standing eerily straight, with their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. The air was so still it felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then we found the other group. At first, I thought it was a joke, like one of those reality show pranks where another group of hikers shows up to mess with you. But as we got closer, it became clear that something was wrong. The group was standing in the middle of the trail, or at least what we thought was the trail, huddled together, their backs to us. There were 3 of them dressed in hiking gear, but something about the way they stood so still and stiff gave me chills. Hey, Jake called out, his voice echoing strangely in the silence. You guys lost too? No answer, not even a flinch. We stopped a few yards away, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was definitely wrong. Their stillness, the way they didn't even turn to acknowledge us. It wasn't normal. Maybe they didn't hear you, Chloe suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. I stepped forward, trying to get a better look. Excuse me, I said, my voice quieter now. We're kind of lost. Do you know where the trail picks back up? Again, no response. No movement. It was like they were frozen in place, not even breathing. There's something about camping that makes you feel like you're stepping outside of time. The fire crackles, the stars shimmer overhead, and the quiet of the wilderness wraps around you. It's a kind of peace you can't find in the city, where the noise of life never really stops. That's why my buddies and I made it a point to take these trips into the woods as often as we could. But one particular trip, the last one we ever took, still sticks with me. Not because of the peace or the beauty of the forest, but because of what happened during the long, dark hours when the fire burned low and the night felt too quiet. It was just the 3 of us that weekend, me, Matt, and Kyle. We'd picked a campsite deep in the forest, miles away from the nearest town, right by a small, isolated lake. It was perfect. No other campers around, just trees and water as far as the eye could see. We set up our tents, got the fire going, and spent the day fishing and joking around like we always did. Everything felt normal. By the time the sun started to set, we were relaxed and ready to settle in for the night. As the darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and we huddled around the fire, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. Matt was in the middle of telling some ridiculous ghost story when we heard the first sound. It was a faint rustling just beyond the light of the fire. At first, we all thought it was a raccoon or maybe a deer wandering through the trees. You hear that? Kyle asked, peering into the darkness. Probably just an animal, I said, though my ears were already straining to catch any other sounds. The woods around us had been quiet all evening. Now, with the night fully settled in, every noise seemed amplified. Matt waved it off, laughing. Dude, we're in the middle of the woods. Of course, there's going to be animals. We all agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The rustling stopped, but the hairs on the back of my neck were still standing up. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that danced at the edge of the trees, and for the first time since we'd arrived, the woods felt a little too still. We tried to brush it off, focusing on keeping the conversation light, but the mood had shifted. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone lurking just beyond the fire's glow. After a while, we decided to call it a night. The fire was dying down, and the chill in the air had grown sharper. We put out the remaining flames, packed away the food, and retreated to our tents. I zipped mine up and lay down, listening to the soft rustling of the trees outside, trying to calm the unease that had settled deep in my gut. That's when the footsteps started. At first, I thought I was imagining it. A soft, rhythmic crunching, like someone walking slowly through the underbrush. My heart rate spiked and I held my breath, straining to listen. It was faint, but unmistakable. Steady footsteps, moving just outside the circle of tents. I sat up, my hand reaching for the flashlight I'd left by my sleeping bag. I hesitated for a second, not wanting to alert Matt or Kyle if it was nothing, but the sound continued. It wasn't an animal. Animals don't walk like that. This was deliberate. I unzipped the tent just enough to poke my head out, shining the flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but I didn't see anything. No movement, no figure, nothing but the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the campsite, moving slowly, methodically, like someone was pacing just outside our reach. I crawled out of the tent, my heart pounding in my chest, and quietly made my way over to Matt's tent. "Hey," I whispered, tapping on the side. "Matt, you awake?" It took a moment, but Matt finally unzipped his tent, blinking groggily. "What's up? Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to speak too loudly. Didn't want to give away the fact that I was onto whatever or whoever was out there. He frowned, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" "The footsteps," I said, glancing nervously toward the trees. "Someone's out there walking around." Matt listened for a second, his expression slowly changing as he, too, picked up on the sound. His eyes widened, and he nodded, suddenly fully awake. We woke Kyle next, and the three of us stood there in the middle of the campsite, flashlights in hand, listening. The footsteps were still there, circling us. They never got closer, never moved farther away, just kept circling. "We should call out," Kyle suggested, his voice shaky. "Maybe it's just someone lost or messing with us." But none of us moved. Something about the sound, the deliberate, unhurried pace, made my skin crawl. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They weren't trying to find their way back to the trail. They were watching us. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could feel the tension between us. All of us waiting, listening, hoping the sound wouldn't start again. "Okay," Matt whispered, his voice tight. "Let's just get back in the tents. We'll pack up first thing in the morning and get out of here." I nodded, but as I turned back to my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't done with us yet. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, but sleep was out of the question. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch had me on edge. Hours passed in a tense, sleepless silence. I don't know what time it was, but at some point, I must have dozed off. It wasn't until the faint light of dawn started creeping through the trees that I finally started to relax, convinced that the worst was over. But just as I was starting to drift into a deeper sleep, I heard something again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was a low, steady breathing, coming from right outside my tent. My eyes snapped open, and I lay there, frozen, my heart pounding. The sound was soft, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was standing just inches away, breathing slowly and deeply. I didn't dare move. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Didn't want whatever was out there to know I was awake. I just lay there listening, every muscle in my body tensed. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing finally stopped. There was a long, agonizing silence, and then faint footsteps moving away from the tent, back into the trees. I waited until I was sure the sound was gone, then slowly, quietly, unzipped the tent and crawled out into the dim morning light. Matt and Kyle were already up, packing their gear in tense silence. Neither of them said a word, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They'd heard it too. We packed up as quickly as we could, not bothering with breakfast or even talking about what had happened. We just wanted to get out of there, back to civilization, back to safety. As we hiked back to the car, the forest seemed different, less welcoming, more oppressive. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something following us. But the woods were empty, as if whatever had been out there during the night had vanished with the sunrise. We never talked about that trip again. It wasn't like we made some kind of pact not to. It was just one of those things you don't bring up, like a bad dream you'd rather forget. But I'll never forget that night. The way the footsteps circled our camp. The sound of the breathing just outside my tent. And I haven't been camping since. By the third thump, I knew something was terribly wrong in the house. I was supposed to be watching the kids, but now I wasn't sure if they were even in their beds anymore. I had been babysitting for the Millers for about 6 months. They were a nice couple, always paid me on time, and their kids, Emma, 8, and Liam, 6, were usually well behaved. Tonight was supposed to be just like any other. Mr. and Mrs. Miller had gone out for their monthly date night, leaving me in charge until midnight. The evening had started normally enough: mac and cheese for dinner, the kids' favorite, supervised bath time, and then I tucked them into bed with a story. By 9 p.m., the house was quiet, and I had settled onto the couch with some homework, leaving the TV on for background noise. That's when I heard it, a soft thump from upstairs, like something heavy hitting the carpet. I muted the TV, straining to listen. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I was about to dismiss it as nothing when I heard it again, this time louder. My heart skipped a beat. Could be nothing, I told myself. Maybe one of the kids had gotten up to use the bathroom, or maybe the house was just settling. Old houses did make strange noises sometimes, right? But then came the third thump, followed by what sounded like footsteps. Heavy footsteps, not the light, quick steps of children. I stood up slowly, my textbook slipping from my lap and hitting the floor with a soft thud. "Emma? Liam?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay up there?" No response, just more silence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had to check on the kids. It was my responsibility, after all. But as I moved toward the stairs, every instinct inside me screamed to run, to flee the house and call for help. I ignored the voice of fear and began climbing the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The upstairs hallway was dark, shadows stretching across the walls from the nightlight plugged into the outlet. I made my way to Emma's room first, pushing the door open slowly. "Emma," I whispered, peering into the darkness. I fumbled for the light switch, and as the room lit up, my stomach dropped. The bed was empty, the covers thrown back as if she had left in a hurry. My breath caught as I spotted her favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear she never went to bed without, lying abandoned on the floor. Panic surged through me. I rushed to Liam's room next door. The scene was the same. An empty bed, rumpled sheets, and no sign of the little boy who should have been sleeping soundly. "Emma, Liam," I called out, no longer caring about keeping quiet. "Where are you?" The house remained silent, mocking my growing fear. I checked the bathroom, finding it empty, then the guest room, the closets, even under the beds. Nothing. As I stood in the hallway, trying to figure out what to do next, I heard another noise. This time, it was coming from downstairs. A soft scraping sound like furniture being moved. My mind raced. Had someone broken in and taken the kids? Were they still in the house? Should I call the police? What would I tell the Millers? I crept back downstairs. My phone clutched tightly in my hand. 911 pre-dialed and ready to call. The scraping sound had stopped, but now I could hear something else. A low, rhythmic humming. It was coming from the kitchen. I inched closer, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was in there would hear it. As I reached the doorway, I took a deep breath and peered around the corner. What I saw made my blood run cold. Emma and Liam were there, but they weren't alone. They stood hand in hand with a figure I can only describe as wrong. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its limbs were too long, too thin, bending at odd angles. And its face, God, its face, where features should have been, there was only smooth, pale skin, interrupted by a wide tooth-filled grin that stretched from ear to ear. The creature was swaying gently, humming that eerie tune, and the children swayed with it. Their eyes glassy and unfocused. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper. I'm not sure, because suddenly, that featureless face turned towards me. The grin widened, if that was even possible, and it raised one long-fingered hand in a grotesque parody of a wave. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, out the front door and into the street, screaming for help. Lights came on in neighboring houses, curious and concerned faces appearing in windows. But I couldn't stop, couldn't explain. All I could do was run and scream. I don't remember much of what happened next. I have vague memories of police cars, of trying to explain what I'd seen to skeptical officers, of the Millers rushing home, their faces pale with worry, of the frantic search of the house that turned up nothing. No creature, no sign of a break-in, and most disturbingly, no Emma and Liam. The days that followed were a blur of questioning and accusations. The police suspected me at first, the babysitter who conveniently lost the kids she was supposed to be watching. But there was no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. It was as if Emma and Liam had simply vanished into thin air. The Millers didn't blame me, at least not openly. But I could see it in their eyes, the unspoken question. How could you let this happen? Weeks turned into months. The search for Emma and Liam continued, but hope dwindled with each passing day. I tried to move on with my life, to forget that terrible night, but the memories haunted me. The sound of that humming, the sight of that grinning, featureless face. They followed me into my dreams, turning them into nightmares. I stopped babysitting. I couldn't bear the thought of being responsible for someone else's children, not after what had happened. I threw myself into my studies, trying to drown out the guilt and fear with academic pursuits. But late at night, when the house was quiet and the shadows grew long, I'd find myself listening for that soft thump, that eerie wondering if the creature would come for me next. It was almost a year later when it happened. I was home alone studying for finals when I heard it, that familiar thump from upstairs. My blood ran cold, memories of that night flooding back. For a long moment, I sat frozen, unable to move. Then slowly I stood up. I knew I should run, should call for help, but a part of me needed to know, needed to see. I climbed the stairs, each step feeling like it took an eternity. The upstairs hallway was dark, just like that night. But this time, there was a faint glow coming from under my bedroom door. With a trembling hand, I reached for the doorknob. I hesitated for a moment, then steeled myself and pushed the door open. There, in the center of my room, stood Emma and Liam. They looked exactly as they had a year ago, not a day older. And behind them, its long arms draped over their shoulders, was the creature. It raised its head as I entered, that terrible grin spreading across its featureless face. And then, in a voice that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly into my mind, it said, "We've been waiting for you. It's time to come home." Emma and Liam turned to me, their eyes still glassy and unfocused. They reached out their hands, inviting me to join them, and despite every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight, to do anything but give in, I felt my feet moving forward. As I took their hands, the creature's grin widened impossibly. The room began to fade away, replaced by swirling darkness. The last thing I remember is the sound of that eerie humming, growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. I woke up in my bed the next morning, convinced it had all been a terrible nightmare. But as I got up, I noticed something on my nightstand that made my blood run cold. A small, worn teddy bear, Emma's teddy bear. I don't babysit anymore. I don't sleep with the lights off. And every night I lie awake, listening for that soft thump, that eerie wondering when the creature will return. Wondering if next time I'll have the strength to resist its call. Because deep down, I know the truth. It's not a matter of if, but when, and when it comes, I'm not sure I'll be able to say no. The neon open sign flickered ominously as I flipped it off, not knowing that in just a few hours, I'd be fighting for my life in that godforsaken gas station. My name's Jack, and this is the story of the night shift that nearly killed me. I'd been working at Pete's Gas and Go for about 6 months. It wasn't glamorous, but the night shift paid better, and it gave me time to study for my college classes during the slow hours. Plus, in a small town like ours, the night shifts were usually quiet. Usually, it was a Tuesday night. Well, technically Wednesday morning around 2 a.m. I had just finished restocking the coolers and was settling behind the counter with my biology textbook when I heard the rumble of an engine outside. I glanced up at the security mirror, expecting to see some bleary-eyed traveler stopping for a caffeine fix. Instead, I saw a beat-up van pull up to the pump furthest from the store. 3 men got out, and something about the way they moved set off alarm bells in my head. They were too alert for this time of night, their movements too calculated. I watched as 2 of them started to fill up the van, while the third headed toward the store. As he got closer, I could see he was a big guy, easily 6'4", built like a linebacker. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. Up close, he looked even more intimidating. A jagged scar ran from his left eye to his chin, and his eyes were darting around the store, taking everything in. "Evening," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you find anything?" He turned those cold eyes on me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Just browsing," he grunted, then started moving down one of the aisles. I kept one eye on him as he meandered through the store, picking up random items and putting them back. Something wasn't right. My hand slowly inched towards the panic button under the counter, but I hesitated. What if I was just overreacting? I didn't want to call the cops for no reason. The bell chimed again, and the other 2 men entered. They were smaller than their friend, but no less menacing. One had a tattoo of a snake coiling up his neck, while the other had a nervous energy about him, his eyes constantly shifting. "Find everything okay?" I asked, my mouth dry. Snake Tattoo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh yeah, we found just what we needed." That's when I saw the gun tucked into his waistband. My heart started racing. This was really happening. We were in the middle of nowhere, at least an hour from the nearest town. No one was coming to save me. "Listen, fellas," I said, raising my hand slowly. "The register doesn't have much cash, maybe a couple $100. It's not worth." "Shut up," Scarface growled, pulling out his own gun. "We're not here for the chump change in your register. Kid, this is just a pit stop." Nervous guy locked the front door and pulled down the blinds. "How long?" he asked Scarface. "Hour, maybe 2, Scarface replied. "Enough time for our friend to patch himself up and for us to figure out our next move." That's when I noticed the dark stain on Snake Tattoo's shirt. Blood. These guys were on the run and they were wounded. This was bad. This was very, very bad. "All right, kid," Scarface said, turning back to me. "Here's how this is gonna go. You're gonna sit tight and keep your mouth shut. You play nice. Maybe you walk away from this. You try to be a hero." He let the threat hang in the air. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Scarface motioned to Nervous Guy, who came around the counter and zip-tied my hands behind my back. They marched me to the storeroom in the back, shoving me down onto an overturned milk crate. "Sit tight," Scarface said with a smirk. "We'll be checking on you." The door closed, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. I could hear them moving around the store, talking in low voices. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this mess. I don't know how long I sat there, my hands going numb from the tight zip ties, listening to the muffled voices outside. Could have been minutes or hours. Time seems to lose all meaning when you're scared out of your mind. Suddenly, the door opened. It was Snake Tattoo, his shirt now off, revealing a crude bandage on his side. He was sweating, his eyes glassy with pain or fever. "Water," he grunted, nodding towards the cases of bottled water stacked against the wall. I stood up awkwardly, my bound hands making it difficult to keep my balance. "I can't exactly grab it for you," I said, turning slightly to show him my tied hands. He grunted again, then stepped forward to grab a bottle himself. As he did, he stumbled slightly, catching himself on the shelf. The movement caused him to wince in pain, and I saw fresh blood seeping through his bandage. "You need a hospital," I said before I could stop myself. Snake Tattoo's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What I need," he snarled, "is for you to shut your mouth." But I was already committed. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe I was just tired of feeling helpless, but I pressed on. "Look, I don't know what you guys are mixed up in, but that wound looks bad. If it gets infected," I said, "shut up." He backhanded me across the face and sending me sprawling onto the concrete floor. Pain exploded in my cheek, and I tasted blood. But as I lay there, my face pressed against the cold floor, I saw something that made my heart leap. A box cutter rot must have fallen off one of the shelves, lay just a few feet away. Snake Tattoo was too busy trying to open his water bottle with shaking hands to notice. I inched towards the box cutter, praying he wouldn't look down. Just as my fingers closed around the handle, the door burst open again. It was Nervous Guy. "Tommy's getting antsy," he said to Snake Tattoo. "Says we need to move soon." Snake Tattoo cursed under his breath. "Tell him to cool it. I'm not going anywhere until this bleeding stops." Nervous Guy's eyes darted to me, then back to Snake Tattoo. "What about him? We can't just leave him here. We'll figure it out," Snake Tattoo snapped. "Now get out of here and let me rest." As soon as the door closed, I started working on my bonds. It was awkward and slow going, trying to maneuver the box cutter with my hands behind my back. I could feel the sharp blade nicking my skin, but I didn't care. Freedom was worth a few cuts. Just as I felt the zip tie give way, the door opened again. This time it was Scarface, and he did not look happy. "Time's up," he growled. "We're moving out now." Snake Tattoos struggled to his feet, his face pale and drawn. "I told you I need more time." Scarface wasn't having it. "Cops found the car we ditched. They'll be expanding their search. We need to go." That's when he noticed me, still on the ground but with my hands now free. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. I didn't give him time to react. I launched myself at him, driving my shoulder into his midsection. We went down in a tangle of limbs, his gun skittering across the floor. What followed was a desperate, frenzied fight. I was younger and fueled by terror and adrenaline, but Scarface was bigger and meaner. He landed a solid punch to my ribs that left me gasping for air. But I had surprise on my side and desperation. As we grappled on the ground, my hand closed around a heavy flashlight that had fallen from one of the shelves. I swung it with all my might, catching Scarface on the temple. He went limp, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I'd killed him. But then I saw his chest rise and fall. He was just unconscious. I scrambled to my feet, snatching up Scarface's gun. Snake Tattoo was leaning heavily against the wall, looking like he might pass out at any moment. He didn't even try to stop me as I ran past him. I burst out of the storeroom, gun raised, only to find Nervous Guy already had his hands up. He'd clearly heard the commotion and decided he wanted no part of it. "Don't shoot," he pleaded. "I'm done, man. I give up." My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the gun steady. "On the ground," I managed to say, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "Face down, hands behind your head." As soon as he hit the floor, I bolted for the phone behind the counter. My hands were shaking, fumbling as I dialed 911. My voice cracking as I gave the dispatcher the details of what had just happened. The next hour was a blur. Police cars and ambulances flooded the gas station, their flashing lights turning everything into a surreal mix of red and blue. I gave my statement over and over, first to the local cops, then to the state police, and finally to a pair of FBI agents. Turns out, these guys were part of a crew responsible for a string of armed robberies across 3 states. The cops had been hunting them for months, and little ol' me, the night shift gas station attendant, had helped bring them down. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the chaos of the crime scene, one of the FBI agents approached me. "You did good, kid," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Not many people would have had the guts to do what you did." I nodded, too exhausted to say anything. The adrenaline had long worn off, leaving me feeling empty and shaky. "Get some rest," the agent continued. "We'll need you to come in later to sign some papers. But for now, go home." Home. The word felt like heaven. I walked to my car, and as I caught my reflection in the window, I saw a bruise blooming on my cheek and dried blood staining my shirt. I barely recognized myself. One thing was for sure. I was done with night shifts at gas stations. Maybe it was time to reconsider that accounting major my parents had always pushed for. Suddenly, a nice, boring desk job sounded pretty damn good. I climbed into my car, started the engine, and cast one last glance at the gas station that had nearly been the death of me. The open sign was still dark, and it probably would be for a while. As I pulled out onto the empty highway, the rising sun warming my face, I couldn't help but laugh. Who would have thought a simple night shift would turn into the craziest night of my life? But hey, at least I had one hell of a story for my next class presentation. What I did on my summer vacation: foiled an armed robbery and captured 3 fugitives. Yeah, that ought to get me an A. I feel compelled to share a story from a perspective that isn't often seen here, the viewpoint of a stalker himself. I want to make it clear that I don't want to justify my actions in any way, but I do think it's important for people to understand how easily a shy, young man's innocent crush can spiral into a full-blown obsession, and how this happened in my case. Now, 10 years later, I'm fully aware of the horrible things I did and thought. Still, I want everyone reading this to understand that not all stalkers are inherently bad people. They're often just lost. Ultimately, though, it's up to the person to step out of the darkness and realize where they are. Please, let me have a moment of your time to explain how badly I went off track and what it took for me to find my way back. If I'm going to tell this story properly, I should start by telling you about myself and who I was. My early childhood was happy as far as I can remember. Nothing really went wrong until adolescence hit and my once cute freckles were overshadowed by severe acne. With the acne came endless bullying and mockery. At that age, no girl, no matter how kind-hearted, wants to be seen with a pizza face at school, and I felt this deeply. The treatment I endured over the years turned me from a shy, kind child into an introverted, angry young man. My only coping strategy seemed to be keeping my head down and trying to get through each day. Unfortunately, that rarely worked out as planned. Anyone who's been through severe bullying can tell you this is often how their day-to-day life unfolds. By the time I reached my first year of college, despite my bitterness and jaded outlook, my heart made a decision my mind never would have. I want to emphasize that even though my college years were far less cruel, the damage to my self-esteem had already been done. Still, I met a girl who immediately captured my heart. Her icy blue eyes and flawless porcelain skin were a beauty I had never seen before, and still haven't since. We had 2 classes together that first year, and I didn't learn a thing. Every bit of focus was on her, and before long, she became involved in every thought of my day and often even in my sleep. I would spend my free time beating myself up, telling myself that even if she treated me nicely, she would never want to be with me. My fears were made fact when I finally summed up the courage to ask her on a date. There was a dance being held for freshmen, and I had overheard her saying she hadn't been asked to accompany anyone yet. Some foolish notion I had conjured up told me that this was my chance to be with her. The next day between classes, I caught up to her and popped the question. The way in which she shot me down hurt me far more than I expected. At that time, she was walking with a couple of other girls. Their laughing at my question cut me deeply, and when she suggested I ask someone else and that she would rather just be friends, well, I'll just say that her words cut me deeply. That night, as I sat in the dark in my dorm room, I cried and cursed myself for being so foolish and cursed her even more. Then I think back on that night, it was where my obsession with her morphed from what I believed to be love into the early phases of hate. No matter how much I would tell myself that I hated her for what she had done, I knew I still would do anything to be with her, if even just for a moment. From that night on and for a long time after, I would rant to any one of my few friends that would listen about how evil and bad females were, while at the same time, I would follow her around obsessing about how beautiful she was anytime they weren't around. The hypocrisy of what I was doing wasn't lost on me. However, I already allowed my emotions to drive my actions. Soon, just looking upon her wasn't enough, and I'd taken a step in a very scary direction. One afternoon, I found myself alone in her dorm room. I'd managed to sneak in while everyone was gone to class, and because I'd made myself well versed in her and her roommates' coming and goings, I knew I had a good hour to myself. For several minutes, I simply sat in her bed, taking in her surroundings and inhaling her wonderful scent on her sheets. Then I moved on to her drawers, pulling each one out in turn and burying my face in the clothing. Time flew by, and when my time was up, I quietly slipped out unseen. A few weeks after that, I took things even further and snuck in while she slept. The sick feeling of nervousness sat heavily in the pit of my stomach as the excitement of it all caused my heart to pound. I sat carefully onto her roommate's bed, who was out that night, and stared at her beautiful body. Her sleep was fitful, and the covers exposed her smooth, soft legs and backside. When I saw this, my heart pounded faster and faster. Terrible thoughts raced through my mind, but I grabbed control of myself and fled from the room before I leapt onto her. I quickly found myself becoming terrified of what I may do to her if I was alone with her again. Many days of battling the monster growing inside me forced to make an important decision that would affect my future. One early morning, I forced myself to go to the college mental health clinic and confess what I had been doing. At least twice I began to turn the doorknob and then stopped. The third time I succeeded. For the next year or more, I would first attend an inpatient facility and then continue to see a shrink once a week. It took quite a while, but with a combination of time, separation, and counseling, I was able to learn how to deal with my insecurities and obsessions. 10 years have passed since that early morning, and I'm proud of how far I've made it. Obviously, I never returned to the college, and that night in her room was the last time I saw her. While I may still at times find myself thinking back to that time, I no longer feel any draw to her. I'm not sure if she ever knew the danger she was in, but I hope she is doing well and is happy. I've bounced from job to job for some time until I was lucky enough to befriend a man that gave me a job doing IT at a small company. Come this September, I'll be there 6 years, and I'm doing very well. As a matter of fact, I was even able to meet a girl the normal way and get married. We're awaiting the arrival of our first child in the new year, and I couldn't be any happier. Looking back at the time and recounting such a terrible period here, I was, at first, unaware of exactly why I was sharing it with you and your listeners. Now that I've had some time to dwell upon it, I guess my goal is twofold. First, I want to give everyone present an idea of how someone can become an obsessed stalker, at least in my case, and how easy it is. Secondly, and most importantly, I want anyone who's reading or hearing this to know that you don't have to listen to what your obsessive mind is telling you. You can prevent yourself from doing something unspeakable and going past an unreturnable line. Not every stalker is a truly evil person. They may have simply lost their way and need a little help returning to the proper path. If you see yourself in the past version of me, don't be afraid to get help. All you have to do is ask. The moment he asked me if I'd ever been in a plane crash, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary flight. But I had no idea how twisted our conversation would get, or how those hours next to a stranger would change me forever. I'd booked a red-eye flight from New York to Los Angeles on a whim. A last-minute business trip that couldn't wait for a more reasonable hour. The airport was eerily quiet when I arrived. Just a few bleary-eyed travelers shuffling through security. I grabbed a coffee, hoping the caffeine would keep me alert enough to get some work done on the flight. Boarding was quick and smooth. The plane was a smaller model, just 2 seats on either side of the aisle. I found my window seat and settled in, pulling out my laptop and headphones. As I was getting comfortable, a man slid into the seat next to me. At first glance, he seemed completely unremarkable, mid-30s, maybe early 40s, wearing jeans and a hoodie, the kind of outfit you'd expect on a late-night flight. He gave me a quick nod as he sat down, and I returned it with a polite smile before turning my attention back to my computer. The plane took off without incident, and I tried to focus on my work. But after about 30 minutes, I felt a tap on my arm. I pulled out an earbud and turned to look at my seatmate. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice friendly enough. I hesitated. I'm not one for small talk on flights, especially not at this hour, but something in his expression made me feel like it would be rude to ignore him. "Los Angeles," I replied. "Business trip." He nodded, seeming genuinely interested. "Do you fly often?" "Sometimes," I said, hoping my short answers would signal the end of the conversation. But instead, he leaned in slightly, his eyes locked onto mine. "You ever been in a crash?" The question caught me completely off guard. It wasn't the usual type of airplane small talk. A chill ran down my spine. "No," I said flatly, turning my attention back to my laptop. He chuckled softly, a low, unsettling sound that made my skin crawl. "You ever wonder what it'd feel like?" he asked, his eyes still fixed on me, almost feverish, and his smile never quite reached them. "Not really," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. He leaned back in his seat, but his gaze remained on me, unwavering. "I think about it sometimes," he said, his voice low. "You know, how fast it would all happen, whether you'd even feel it." I shifted uncomfortably, looking around for a flight attendant. But the cabin was dark, and most passengers were asleep, absorbed in their own worlds. "I'm sure it's not something we need to worry about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Flying is statistically very safe." He laughed again, that same unsettling chuckle. "Statistics don't mean much when you're plummeting from 30,000 feet. Do they?" I didn't respond, instead putting my earbud back in and staring intently at my screen. But I couldn't focus on the words in front of me. My heart was racing, and I could feel his eyes on me. After a few minutes, I felt another tap on my arm. Against my better judgment, I turned to look at him. "You ever think about what people are really like?" he asked, his voice low, almost conspiratorial. "What do you mean?" I asked, despite myself. He leaned in closer, and I could smell his breath, a mix of coffee and something metallic. "You know, what they're hiding, their secrets, the dark stuff." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly bone dry. I don't really think about that kind of thing." His eyes gleamed in the dim cabin light. "Everyone's got something, a secret, something dark they don't want the world to know." I shifted away from him as much as my seat would allow. "Look, I really need to get some work done." "What's yours?" he interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have any dark secrets," I said, trying to sound firm, but hearing the tremor in my voice. He smiled, a slow, creeping thing that made my skin crawl. "Everyone does. Maybe you just don't know yours yet." I pressed the call button, praying for a flight attendant to appear. But no one came, he continued, seemingly oblivious to my discomfort. "In a crash, all those secrets would come out. In those last moments, when you know it's all over, what would you confess?" I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking my laptop to the floor. "I need to use the restroom," I mumbled, not meeting his eyes. As I squeezed past him, I felt his hand brush against my leg. Could have been an accident. The space was tight after all, but something about the touch felt deliberate, invasive. In the tiny airplane bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm my racing heart. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, seeing the fear in my own eyes. This was ridiculous. He was just a weird guy making inappropriate conversation. Nothing to be afraid of. But as I opened the door to return to my seat, I saw him watching me. His eyes followed my every move as I walked down the aisle. and that smile, that terrible knowing smile, was still plastered on his face. I sat down, immediately putting my earbuds in and turning up the volume on my music. I didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, but I could feel his presence next to me, oppressive and unsettling. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I felt another tap on my arm. I ignored it. He tapped again, harder this time. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead. Then I felt his breath on my ear as he leaned in close. "You can't ignore me forever," he whispered. "We're stuck here together, you and me. Might as well make the most of it." I jerked away, finally turning to face him. "Please," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't want to talk. I just want to be left alone." His smile widened. "But we were having such an interesting conversation. Don't you want to know what my dark secret is?" I shook my head, feeling panic rising in my chest. "No, I really don't." He leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "What if I told you I've been in a crash before? What if I told you I was the only survivor?" My blood ran cold. I looked into his eyes, searching for some sign that he was joking, that this was all some sick game. But all I saw was a deep, unsettling darkness. "That's not funny," I managed to say. He shrugged, leaning back in his seat. "It wasn't meant to be, truth rarely is." I stood up again. This time, I was determined to find a flight attendant and beg for a seat change if necessary. But as I turned toward the aisle, the plane lurched violently. The seatbelt sign dinged, and a voice came over the intercom, asking all passengers to return to their seats immediately. I collapsed back into my seat, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the seatbelt. The plane shuddered again, and I heard the unmistakable sound of the engines changing pitch. Next to me, the man began to laugh. It was wild, unhinged, so unsettling that it sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Here we go," he said, his eyes wide with what looked disturbingly like excitement. "Time to face those secrets. Time to see what we're really made of." The plane dropped suddenly, and screams erupted throughout the cabin. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling, and chaos broke out. As I reached for my mask with shaky hands, I felt his grip on my arm. I turned to look at him one last time, and what I saw will haunt me forever. His face was transformed, alight with a manic glee that was terrifying to witness. "Tell me," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the failing engines and the screams of the other passengers. "What's your darkest secret? What will you take to your grave?" In that moment, as the plane plummeted and my life flashed before my eyes, I realized something. I did have a secret, a darkness I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it existed. And as I looked into the crazed eyes of the stranger beside me, I felt that darkness rise to the surface. I began, but my words were drowned out by another violent lurch of the plane. The last thing I remember is his laughter, rising above the chaos, as the world around us turned to fire and twisted metal. I woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, one of the few survivors. They told me I was lucky, that it was a miracle I had made it out alive. But as I lay there, replaying those final moments in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that luck had nothing to do with it. The man next to me hadn't survived. They never found his body. Sometimes, I wonder if he was ever really there at all, or if he was some sort of manifestation of my own buried darkness. But in my darkest moments, when I close my eyes and hear the screech of tearing metal, I can still see his face. I can still hear his laugh. And I wonder what was his secret, and more importantly, what was mine. This is the first time I'm sharing this story. I've never told anyone about it because I'm scared of how people will react. But here it goes. This event happened in 2016 when I was 26. My best friend, who I'll call Tanner, and I were out drinking at a typical Irish pub. Tanner was there with his girlfriend, who I'll call Sarah. I've been friends with her for a few years as well. Tanner and I started drinking early, and Sarah joined us later around 9 p.m. I remember Sarah being mad at me for letting Tanner get as drunk as he was, but after I ordered a few rounds of tequila for us, She calmed down, and we resumed having a good time, laughing about all the funny memories we shared. Tanner and I had originally gone to the pub to watch a live band that we'd seen perform many times, but for some reason, they didn't show up. So we just kept drinking beer after beer, shot after shot. I'll admit I was really drunk, but I can say for sure that the alcohol had nothing to do with what was about to happen to me. At some point, Tanner and Sarah started arguing about something. I don't remember what exactly, but knowing them, it was probably something trivial. Tanner ended up saying something like, "Fine, we'll just go home right now then." I remember feeling bummed that my best friend was about to leave when we were having such a great time. So I convinced them to stay for one more shot on me. I told the bartender to bring another round to the table. Tanner and Sarah asked for their bills, and I got up to go to the bathroom. While I was at the urinal, I suddenly felt dizzy for a second and thought I might throw up. I considered that maybe it was a mistake to order another shot. As I walked out of the bathroom, I saw Tanner and Sarah looking at me, already holding their shot glasses in the air, saying, "Come on, come on." Tanner handed me my shot, and we clinked glasses, saying cheers. Tanner and Sarah got up, I hugged them both, and we said our goodbyes. I asked, "How are you guys getting home?" Tanner said he was just going to drive. I told him, "Just get a cab. You don't want to get pulled over or crash your new car." He argued, saying it was only a 5-minute drive, and it wasn't worth leaving his car at the pub to take a cab. I told him again that I thought it was a bad idea, but he kept insisting it would be fine. So I gave up trying to convince him. He said he'd text me when they got home, and I waved my phone at him, saying something like, "Okay, I'll be waiting for it." About 30 minutes later, I still hadn't received a text, but honestly, I had forgotten about it as I was mingling with other people at the pub. That's when I felt my phone vibrate. It was Sarah calling me. I answered, expecting to say something like, "Took you guys long enough?" But before I could say anything, she was crying and yelling into the phone, and I couldn't make out what she was saying. I said, "Calm down. What's going on?" She cried, "They got into an accident." She was crying so hard that I could barely understand her. I kept asking questions like, "How bad is it? Is Tanner hurt? Are the police there?" Then, through her sobs, she kept saying, "He's not waking up. I think he's dead." Then she said that she saw the police cars coming and hung up on me. My heart sank to my stomach. I tried to call her back probably 10 times, but no answer. I didn't know how to react as I was in pure shock and felt like I was going to throw up. I ran to the bathroom and threw up into the sink. I was looking at myself in the mirror and all I could feel was anger. I started punching the walls of the bathroom and screaming. I sat on the ground by the sink and thought about how it was all my fault. If only I would have taken his keys. If maybe I didn't ask him to hang out that night, this all could have been avoided. I picked myself up and wiped the tears out of my eyes. I didn't want to be here anymore. People were looking at me, laughing. I just wanted to pay my tab and leave. When I left to the bathroom, I came around the corner to where my table was, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I saw Tanner and Sarah holding their shot glasses saying, come on, hurry up." I froze. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know if this was even real. Tanner said something like, "You don't look too good." I grabbed him and started saying a bunch of jumbled nonsense trying to explain what just happened. He then laughingly said something like, "Maybe you don't need another one of these." I let out the biggest sigh of relief and teared up again. I was so confused but also so relieved. It was the same feeling you get when you awake from a terrible nightmare and realize you're safe in your own bed. I sat there speechless for a second. Tanner and Sarah took their shots and then Tanner grabbed his keys. I said, "Tanner, wait. How are you getting home?" He said he was just going to drive as they lived only 5 minutes away. I started to freak out. I felt the whole event I had just witnessed was happening again. I yelled, "No, give me your keys. I'm paying for your cab home." He was saying something like, "What's your deal? It's all good." I said, "No, trust me. It's not a good idea." I pulled the cash out of my wallet and said, "Here, take it." I also said that I would drive him back to the pub in the morning to get his car. He said, "All right, thanks, man. And that is probably for the best." I remember watching them leave feeling so confused as to what was going on. I yelled across the bar, "Message me when you get home," waving my phone in the air. Sarah waved goodbye and Tanner just smiled as they walked out the door. I sat at my table with my head in my hands for about 10 minutes, then felt a buzz from my phone. It was Tanner. He said thanks for the cab, I'm home, and that he was worried about how hungover he was going to be in the morning. I could feel an intense weight being lifted off my chest, and I finally called my own cab home. For the next few days, everything felt weird to me. I didn't know what to think of this thing that happened. I didn't know if I should go see a psychiatrist or talk to my friends and family about it. I decided to keep it to myself because I have always been scared of what people would think of me after telling them this insane story. I have been thinking about this almost every day for the past few years. It brings me closure to finally share my story, even if it's anonymously. I feel like for some reason something gave me another chance to save my friend. I don't know what this is or why it happened. I just pray something like this never happens again. I think about this event at least once a day, and even though it happened a few years ago and some of the details are a little blurry, it still gives me chills. One January night, a group of us were hanging out when one of us had the idea to make a bonfire using the brown, dried-out Christmas tree as kindling. We were bored and jumped at the chance to do something, even if it might be considered illegal. One of my friends joked, "It's only illegal if we get caught." And with that logic, we set out to find a place to say goodbye to the Christmas season. My friend, who we'll call Sheila, knew of a spot where we could do it without likely being caught by the police. The only catch was that we had to wait until dark. What she didn't mention was that this place was a swamp, with wooden walking paths winding through the trees and water for people to walk during the day. As we drove up, not seeing any lights, it didn't look like somewhere that would be open at night. But there we were. Once we arrived and set up the tree for burning, one of our friends suggested walking the dark trails. No flashlights, just the little bit of moonlight to guide us. We all hesitated for a moment but agreed to the adventure. Using the headlights of our cars, we saw two entrances leading into the forest. Naturally, we thought we would enter one side and come out the other. Sheila and I hung back as we headed toward the path, planning to pull a prank. Sheila had a crush on one of the guys in our group, and the two of them would often flirt and joke around. She had learned that he was a bit of a scaredy cat, which gave her the idea for the prank. The plan was for me to sneak off toward the exit of the path, meet them halfway, and jump out to scare the life out of him. It was too good an opportunity to pass up. So, as they started down the entrance, I snuck off through the exit. The swamp was alive with sounds. Frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and creatures scurrying around. A couple of times, I heard a splash as a toad jumped into the water nearby. The darkness of the night didn't bother me. I was too excited about pulling off this prank. The look on his face, the squeals of his screaming, it was going to be awesome. Eventually, I kept walking and walking but wasn't finding the group. Surely they should have met them by now, but where are they? I stopped for a moment, straining my ears to see if I could hear them coming towards me. But all I was met with were the sounds of the swamp and then silence. I stopped. Was it possible that they were quiet so they could scare me? Sure. But all of them being that quiet? Do you know the sound someone makes when they're swimming slowly through the water? A sort of light sloshing noise? That was the sound I was hearing coming from in front of me. I froze, straining my ears towards the sloshing, noticing that it didn't sound like a frog or a fish, but what it sounded like I had no idea. There was a thud against the wooden path, rocking it slightly, then slapping noises that sounded like wet flippers hitting the ground. I would be curious afterwards, but with my heart hammering in my chest and my knees about to give out from underneath me, I turned around and took off as fast as I was able out of the swamp and away from whatever it was that was back there. When I emerged from the forest, my group of friends were out there waiting for me. Apparently, after not seeing me for a while, they grew concerned. So concerned that Sheila had given away the prank about to be pulled, and they hurried back, not knowing what had become of me. They were about to walk the path I had taken to find me when I suddenly appeared. It wasn't until later that we discovered that the two paths that we had seen led in two different directions. something that would have been nice to know beforehand. As for what was in that swamp, I have no idea, and none of my friends believed me, thinking that it was just a frog or something. Over the years, I tend to think that maybe they were right and I just imagined it. But that didn't remove the fact that this was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. The moment they walked in, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary night shift. Their eyes were too sharp, their smiles too wide, and the way they looked at me, well, it felt like a predator sizing up its prey. Little did I know, my quiet night at the 24-hour diner was about to spiral into a nightmare that would haunt me for years. My name's Alice, and I've been working the graveyard shift at Mel's Diner for about 6 months. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and suits my night owl lifestyle. Most nights are pretty quiet. A few truckers stopping for coffee, maybe some college kids grabbing a late-night snack. Nothing I can't handle. That night started like any other. I had just finished wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, flashing my best customer service smile, but it froze on my face when I saw them. There were 5 of them, all men, dressed in dark clothes that looked a little too polished for our small diner. They swaggered in like they owned the place, talking and laughing loudly. The few other customers, a quiet elderly couple and a lone trucker, glanced up nervously before quickly looking away. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sit anywhere you like. I'll be right with you." They chose a booth in the corner, sprawling across the seats. As I approached with menus, I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up, calculating. It made my skin crawl. "What can I get for you?" I asked, pen poised over my notepad. The one closest to me, a man with a scar running down his cheek, grinned up at me. His teeth were too white, too sharp. "Coffee, sweetheart. Lots of it. And keep it coming," he added with a wink. I nodded and turned to leave, but he caught my wrist. His grip was like iron, his skin cold against mine. "And don't go anywhere," he said, his voice low. "We might need some extra service." I pulled my hand away, my heart pounding. As I walked back to the counter, I could hear them laughing, the sound grating against my nerves. For the next hour, I kept them supplied with coffee, deflecting their increasingly crude comments and wandering hands. The other customers left quickly, casting sympathetic glances my way as they hurried out the door. Soon it was just me and them. I was refilling their cups for what felt like the 100th time when things took a turn. The man with the scar grabbed my arm again, pulling me close. "You know," he said, his breath hot against my ear, "we're not really here for the coffee." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me," I said, my voice shakier than I'd have liked. He laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Or what? You'll call for help." He gestured around the empty diner. "There's no one here but us, sweetheart." That's when I saw it. The glint of metal tucked into his waistband. A gun. My blood ran cold as I realized just how much trouble I was in. Now, he continued, standing up slowly. "Why don't you be a good girl and open that cash register for us?" I backed away, my mind racing. The phone was on the other side of the counter. If I could just reach it, but they were too fast. 2 of them vaulted over the counter, cutting off my escape. The others spread out, blocking the exits. I was trapped. "Come on, Alice," the scarred man said, reading my name tag. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Open the register, give us the money, and maybe we'll let you walk away from this." I knew he was lying. The look in his eyes told me they had no intention of letting me go. Whatever happened here tonight, they couldn't leave any witnesses. My hands shaking, I moved towards the register. My mind was whirling, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. As I punched in the code to open the drawer, I remembered something. The silent alarm button hidden under the counter. If I could just reach it without them noticing. I opened the register, making a show of gathering the bills. "Here," I said, holding out the money. "Take it. It's all we have." The scarred man snatched the cash from my hand, quickly counting it. His face darkened. This is it. This is all you've got. I nodded, trying to look scared and helpless. It wasn't hard. Business has been slow. Please, that's everything in the register. He exchanged glances with his companions, a silent communication passing between them. Then, without warning, he lashed out, backhanding me across the face. I stumbled, tasting blood. Don't lie to me, he snarled. Where's the rest of it? Where's the safe? I touched my stinging cheek, tears welling in my eyes. There is no safe, I said. I swear that's all we have. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking my head back. Wrong answer, sweetheart. Boys, tear this place apart. Find that safe. The others started ransacking the diner, appending tables and smashing dishes. I watched in horror as they destroyed the place, knowing that each passing minute decreased my chances of making it out of here alive. The scarred man dragged me into the kitchen, throwing me against the industrial refrigerator. Last chance, he growled. Tell me where the safe is, or things are going to get real unpleasant for you. I saw the knife in his hand then, the blade catching the fluorescent light. Terror coursed through me, but with it came a surge of adrenaline. I knew I had to act now or I'd never get another chance. I pretended to slump in defeat. Okay, I whispered. Okay, I'll show you. He grinned, victorious. That's more like it. Where is it? Under the counter, I said. There's a hidden panel. He dragged me back out to the main area. Show me, he ordered. I moved behind the counter, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he must be able to hear it. This was it, my one chance. As I knelt down, pretending to reach for a non-existent panel, my hand found the silent alarm button. I pressed it, praying it still worked, praying help would come in time. There's nothing here, the man shouted, realizing he'd been tricked. He grabbed me, spinning me around to face him. The knife was at my throat now, the cold metal pressing against my skin. You lying bitch. I closed my eyes. Certain this was my last moment, I braced myself for the worst. But then, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't dared to make, I heard it. Sirens in the distance, growing louder. The man's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in fury. You, he hissed. You did this. What happened next was a blur of violence and fear. The men panicked, running for the exits. The scarred man made a move as if to drag me with him, but his companions called for him to leave me. In his moment of hesitation, I managed to break free, scrambling over the counter and running for the kitchen. I huddled in the walk-in freezer, shivering not just from the cold, but from the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I could hear shouts, the sound of breaking glass, car engines roaring to life, then, blessedly, the sound of police sirens right outside the diner. When a police officer finally found me, I was half frozen and in shock. They wrapped me in a blanket and led me out to an ambulance, assuring me I was safe now. In the days that followed, I learned the full story. The men were part of a gang that had been terrorizing small businesses across 3 states. They'd hit 2 other diners that same night before coming to Mel's. Thanks to my quick thinking with the silent alarm, the police had not only saved me but had also managed to apprehend 3 of the 5 men. I'd like to say I went back to work, that I didn't let them win by scaring me away. But the truth is I couldn't. Every time I looked at that diner, all I could see was the glint of a knife. All I could hear were those mocking laughs. I found a new job, working days at a bookstore, but I still have nightmares about that night. I still wake up in a cold sweat, feeling phantom hands grabbing at me, hearing that scarred man's voice in my ear. They caught the other 2 eventually. I had to testify at their trial, had to relive that night all over again. But seeing them led away in handcuffs, knowing they couldn't hurt anyone else, made it worth it. I'm stronger now in some ways, more cautious in others, and I never, ever work night shifts anymore. Because I know now that sometimes the monsters don't hide under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes they walk right through the front door with smiles too wide and eyes too sharp, ready to turn an ordinary night into a waking nightmare. This happened quite a while ago, so please bear with me. I was a sophomore in high school, finishing up band practice. It was around 7:30 in the evening, and my friends and I were hanging out, chatting for a bit. We always stayed after practice to avoid the crowd in the band hall, plus it gave us a chance to unwind. As we were talking, we saw one of our friends, a freshman, talking to his dad and his little sister. Now, none of us had ever really talked to his dad before, but we had heard things about him, and let's just say he was a bit off. So we didn't think much of what happened next. My friend had been talking for a while when his dad called us over. The guy my friend was talking to looked remarkably like him. Same hair, same skin tone, very similar mannerisms. But he had this greasy, uncomfortable vibe about him. He seemed visibly uneasy, avoiding eye contact and acting strangely, like he was in a big hurry to leave. He was shuffling around, clearly trying to avoid looking at us, and kept glancing at us in a way that felt off. But again, we figured he was just our friend's dad, and we knew he was a bit weird, so we didn't think much about it. Then he started talking about how he wanted us, me and 3 of my friends, all trombonists, to play for him in a Cuban jazz ensemble he was apparently putting together. We were all pretty into jazz at the time, so when he mentioned that we'd get paid for both practices and performances, we got excited. He was really insistent, saying we needed to come with him right then to meet the rest of the bandmates. My friends and I were all for it, eager to jump at the opportunity. The whole time, though, there was this girl standing next to him. We hadn't really noticed her before, but she had been quiet through the whole conversation, and now it was clear that she was very uncomfortable. Our band director had spotted us by this point and walked over to see what was going on. She was tough, no nonsense, hardest type of person, and when she approached, she asked, "Who's this guy?" Naturally, I thought she was mad at us for taking our time and not putting our stuff away quickly enough, so I answered, "Well, he's our friend's dad, and right then my friend cut me off and said, "What? He's not my dad." Now at this point, the man gets very irritated. Our director tells him that he needs to leave, and this is when I start noticing the little girl more. First of all, she looks nothing like this man. This is pure conjecture on my part, but her skin color, her eye color, her hair color, none of them matched him. The man starts arguing with my director, saying how she can't talk to him like that, and he seems like he's about to punch our director, in fact. But by this point, he's attracted some attention, and our 2 other directors are here as well. The little girl is grabbing him by the shirt and trying to keep him back. She's not crying, but her voice seems like she's about to. She's pleading for him to stop and asks him to please just go home. Now this is the first time the girl spoke to me, and so this is when I first get a good look at her, and she was really, really thin, wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and is younger than us by maybe a couple of years. She also has some pretty obvious bruises, and as mentioned above, looks nothing like her dad. Finally, it seems the man's given up and he's attracted quite a crowd, and he shuffles off. He doesn't really run to his car, but he goes off as fast as he can without actually running, tugging the little girl at his side. They call the cops, and the cops circle the area looking for him or his car, but there's no sign and we never saw him again. After the incident, we spoke to our friend about it, and he mentioned how the little girl approached him first and tried to get him to get into their car before the man finally got out of the car and started to talk to my friend himself. I'm still not too sure what was going on that day. I don't know what would have happened to us had we gotten in the car with him as planned, but it definitely psyched me out for a bit, and I had completely forgotten about the incident until I was browsing Reddit and stuff, and it all just came back to me. Finally, I'd like to add that we've since met the friend in question's dad, and they actually look remarkably similar, which is kind of a weird coincidence. Whatever happened that day, it still sits with me really uncomfortably. This happened about 2 years ago when I was on a cross-country road trip with my good friend, Kim. We started out in the Northwest, and our final destination was Georgia. We were trying to get there as quickly as possible. Since it was just the 2 of us, we took turns driving and sleeping. We had just passed through Laramie, Wyoming, where I got pulled over for speeding. It wasn't much, just 10 miles over the speed limit. I apologized to the officer, and he kindly let us go, especially since our car didn't have cruise control and we still had a long way to go. After leaving Laramie, we didn't stop for a while, as the highway cut through very few towns. It was probably 3 or 4 in the morning, and the highway was completely empty. Tall pines lined the two-lane road, and jagged mountains framed the star-filled sky above. Kim was sleeping deeply, her seat reclined all the way back, a blanket covering her head. I had the radio on, but she was so tired that she didn't even notice it. I was trying to focus on the road, keeping awake with the quiet music playing. Visibility was poor, and there were no lights on this stretch of road. Then, suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror. I quickly checked my speedometer, but I was keeping to the speed limit after the earlier warning. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and rolled down my window. The police car behind me looked like an unmarked vehicle, but it was hard to be sure. Kim didn't stir as the officer approached my window. "Ma'am," he said in a Midwestern drawl, "you know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer, I don't," I replied. His flashlight was aimed directly at my face, so I had to look away, instead focusing on the badge on his chest. "Your plates sure are from far away," he said. "Where are you headed?" The officer in Laramie had asked the same thing. "Georgia, family emergency." "Is that so?" he replied, his tone skeptical. "Well, miss, you aren't in any shape to make it to Georgia from Nebraska." "No, siree." I frowned, wondering if something was wrong with the car. Maybe the tail lights or something I had missed in my tired state. "I'm sorry. What's wrong?" I asked. "Here, miss, step out of the car." "I can show you," he said, gesturing with his flashlight. The beam swept across Kim's face, still covered by her blanket. She yawned. "What's going on?" she asked sleepily. Without another word, the officer turned, walked back to his car, and made a U-turn. He sped off in the opposite direction down the highway. Kim and I just stared at each other for a moment before I quickly started the car, rolled up the window, and drove off, disregarding the speed limit this time. I worked as a nurse for 7 years, spending my entire career at the same facility. This facility had undergone numerous renovations over the years since it first opened in 1960. By the time I began working there in 2011, only half of the building remained the original structure, with the rest being added on over time. I worked mostly night shifts, which suited me better since I've always been a night owl and found it easier than mornings. During my time there, I had several strange experiences, but I'll share the ones that stand out the most. To give you some context, I've had experiences with the supernatural since I was 3 years old, so I believe in it, but I'm not obsessed, just more aware of it, if that makes sense. One particular wing of the original building always gave me a sense of dread. It had a small sitting room with a television where residents could relax during the day. However, when I worked my night shifts, this area gave me such an overwhelming feeling of fear and unease that I would avoid it as much as possible. I'd even take the long way around just to stay away from it. I didn't know of anything specific happening there, but my instincts screamed that something was off and that whatever was there wasn't happy about me being nearby. During the day, the feeling would lift, but as soon as night fell, that oppressive sensation would return. It always felt like someone was watching me, and they didn't like that I was there. I spoke to a few other nurses about it, and they all admitted to feeling the same way. Another incident stands out in my memory. There was a 90-year-old woman, let's call her Jane, who had breakfast one morning and then asked to be taken back to her room to rest. She was usually in good health, but she mentioned not feeling well. When the nurse did her rounds 20 minutes later, she found that Jane had passed away in her sleep. The cause of death was an aortic aneurysm, so she didn't suffer. In aged care, death is usually a drawn-out process, often taking days or even weeks. Jane was a sweet Polish lady who had outlived her children and lost her husband many years ago, so she had no visitors. Every night, I would check on her and bring her tea at exactly 9:30 p.m. and say goodnight, just like clockwork. Of course, not everything runs smoothly in healthcare, and sometimes it's impossible to follow a strict routine. But if I ever happened to be late and it was 9:35, she would ring her call bell and ask for her tea, apologizing profusely for bothering me. I would always reassure her, "Whenever you need help, just press the button. You're not in trouble. I love to help." She'd then always say her usual, "Good night, sweet girl," and I'd leave her room to continue with my shift. When Jane passed away, the funeral home was late to pick her up. I helped the undertaker when I started my shift that afternoon. Each room had a call bell next to the toilet, one beside the bed, and residents wore a necklace or bracelet with a call bell attached. When a resident passes away, their room's call bell is disconnected on the same day, and their personal bell is placed at the nurse's station, ready to be used for the next resident. So, when Jane's call bell started ringing at 9:36, it made no sense. Her room's bell had already been disconnected, and her personal bell was sitting in a drawer next to me. A little unsettled, I headed down to her room to make sure no dementia patient had wandered in there by mistake. Maybe maintenance hadn't properly turned off the bell, even though I had personally spoken with them after they disconnected it. I was trying to rationalize it, but deep down, I was starting to feel uneasy. When I entered her room, it was completely dark. No one was inside, and I could tell the bells had been turned off because I couldn't get it to turn on from within the room. I had to cancel the call from the main desk instead. It was strange, but I suddenly felt a sense of peace. It was odd because normally, I would have been a mess in that situation. I just felt like Jane was trying to say goodbye. As I was closing the door to her room, I heard a shrill scream, and my best friend came running down the hall, visibly shaken and crying. Once I got her to calm down, she said, "I was in X-wing charting," and Jane walked past me in her nightie. Then she turned the corner to the front wing. But when I looked around, she wasn't there. She's dead, right? She died. What did I just see? When I was a junior in college, I enrolled in a modern American literature class with a professor I'll call Dr. H. Her class took place right after lunch, so many students would shuffle in looking as if they were about to doze off. Dr. H, understanding this, would try to wake us up a bit by telling us a story before starting the lecture. Most of the time, her stories were about the author we were studying that day. Some were more engaging than others, but there was one story that grabbed everyone's attention. She warned us that it was a bit long, but she thought we'd find it interesting because, as she said, the devil is in the details. Dr. H was a senior in college when this story took place. She shared a room with another senior, whom she referred to as S. One day, after spending the day reading and working on assignments, they decided to take a break, only pausing once to eat sandwiches while listening to the radio. Around 8 p.m., they decided to reward themselves with the rest of the evening off. Dr. H had a novel she'd been eager to read, while S planned to treat herself to some cocktails. S told Dr. H that she'd be back in an hour, maybe 2, and jokingly added, "If I'm not back in 2 hours, make sure the police find my body." S headed to a bar that was popular with students because it was so close to campus. She sat down at the bar and ordered a dry martini. She didn't notice the man sitting next to her until she looked up from her drink and was greeted by a smile. The man raised his glass and said, "Hello." S immediately felt embarrassed, especially since there was an empty seat next to her. She started to stand up, thinking she had broken an unspoken bar rule by sitting next to him. But before she could move, the man said, "You don't have to move if you don't want to. I like the company." He extended his hand and introduced himself as Chris. He told her he worked in construction and was renting a room nearby. He asked her what she was studying, and when she told him psychology, his eyes lit up. To her surprise, he started talking about Freud and Jung. S mentioned that she had to do an experiment for her final project, and Chris asked which method she planned to use, an observational study or a survey. She told him she wanted to explore the connection between a lack of empathy and the potential for criminal behavior. She explained that she was thinking of doing an observational study, similar to Milgram's controversial experiments, but instead of using shock treatments, she'd pose different scenarios. Chris shook his head. "You should do a survey instead," he said. S argued that people could easily lie on a survey without a second thought, but it was much harder to lie face to face. Chris chuckled and said, "Sweetheart, a psychology professor could look at a student for 3 years and never have a clue that the kid killed his mother and buried her in the backyard. People can lie to your face if they really want to keep a secret. But a true sicko can't resist showing his true colors on a survey because that guy wants to shock you. S listened as Chris continued, making his case with the example of Jack the Ripper's infamous letters from hell to support his argument. But she had already decided that though Chris knew some things about psychology, his lack of knowledge was beginning to show. Nevertheless, ES still appreciated how passionate Chris was about helping her make the right decision regarding her project. She eventually told Chris that she would bring up all the good points he had made to her professor, and this seemed to satisfy him. Though S was attracted to men her own age, Chris had a certain appeal. He was not bad looking for an older man, and most importantly, he was easy to talk to. Over the course of 45 minutes, they had talked about various subjects including psychology, politics, and places Chris had traveled to while working various construction jobs. In all that time, Chris had not hit on S once. If Chris was trying to seduce her, he was being admirably patient in his approach. He did offer to buy S another martini when she finished her first. And though S would have normally said no to the offer, she felt so comfortable around Chris that she let him buy her a drink. While she had carefully nursed her first martini, S quickly drained her second, and without asking permission first, Chris bought her another. S did not mind because she wanted to spend more time with Chris. It pleased her that Chris seemed to have no expectations for sex in return for his generosity. S's attention quickly turned momentarily from Chris to the television behind the bartender. The newscaster was giving a preview for the evening news, which included a story about a fatal car accident that had occurred earlier that morning. S told Chris that she had heard about the accident on the radio that afternoon. She said that she felt terrible because a whole family had been killed in a head-on crash. Chris replied, "I wonder if anyone was beheaded." Then he chuckled. S was stunned by this sudden change in Chris's personality. It was like an invisible mask had quietly slipped off of Chris's face to reveal the true man underneath. S had an urge to leave the bar, but the psychology major in her was intrigued. She had read about inappropriate affects and emotional personality disorders, but she had never met someone who displayed any of those characteristics before. Any desire that she had to sleep with Chris was now over, but she thought that he might be an interesting story to share with her fellow psychology majors. S continued to listen as Chris started talking in graphic detail about some of the accidents he had seen at construction sites, including one guy whose hand and wrist got pulled into a cement mixer and another guy who fell 4 stories from scaffolding and wound up in a twisted mess on the rubble below. The whole time he was talking about his fellow co-workers being maimed or killed on the job, Chris was smiling and giggling. S tried not to show her disgust, but when Chris followed up on a story of one of his co-workers being impaled by a piece of rebar by inviting S to his room for some real drinks, S suddenly remembered that she told her roommate she would be back in an hour. Chris' face was suddenly indifferent, not angry or sad, but more cold and expecting. Most men would have tried to turn on the charm in hopes of salvaging the night with a potential conquest, but Chris had already caught the eye of a blonde that had just walked into the bar. S said good night. Chris gave her a little wave but said nothing. When S finally arrived back to her room, S apologized for being late. She told Dr. H that she had been talking with a man. Dr. H smiled at the news and said, "So what was he like?" S replied, "He was interesting but not in a good way." Early that morning, Dr. H was woken up by a pounding sound on their door. She heard the RA shouting on the other side of the door, "Wake up. The campus is on lockdown." Dr. H had to shake S awake. They went outside to the hallway and saw the other occupants on the floor standing in nightgowns and pajamas crying, whispering, or just looking dazed and confused. The RAs looked panicked and they spoke to each other in whispers. Dr. H learned through various conversations that several girls had been brutally attacked on campus just hours earlier. The police believed the killer could still be on campus. At that moment, no one in the dorm knew the true extent of what had happened. Later that morning, each girl in the dorm was asked if they had seen anyone suspicious the night before. For a brief moment, S thought of Chris, but quickly dismissed it, convincing herself that Chris was probably with another woman. S told the officer no, and the thought slipped from her mind. A month later, when a news report revealed that the campus killer had been caught, there was an audible sigh of relief and a few cheers from the young women gathered around the television. Dr. H smiled, but when she glanced at S, her roommate was staring at the screen, her face drained of color and her eyes wide. S muttered, "I think I'm gonna throw up." It wasn't until 2 years later, when Dr. H had just completed her master's degree and S was now in law school, that the topic of that terrifying night resurfaced. Over brunch, Dr. H noticed that S suddenly looked unwell. She asked her what was wrong. S paused, taking a sip of her orange juice, and Dr. H noticed her hand trembling. After a long silence, S finally spoke. "That night at the bar, if Chris had asked me to go to his room 30 minutes into our conversation, I would have gone without hesitation." S's eyes welled up with tears. She continued, "I wonder if I would be here right now. The man S had drinks with that night was Ted Bundy." I was about 13 when this story took place. My parents split up when I was young, and my mom had to take care of my sister and me. She's always been very honest and thorough with her work, so she found it rewarding to clean offices and houses for a living. My sister and I often went along to help, and by the time this story happened, we were pretty used to it. My mom had 3 buildings she cleaned regularly, and we gave them nicknames. There was the main building, the red building, and the brick building. Creative, right? We had to clean all 3 that night, so we started with the red building. Out of all the places I'd been to with my mom, the red building was by far my least favorite. From the outside, it looked completely normal, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt this overwhelming sense of depression and unease. It was like all the life had been sucked out of the place, and I just wanted to sleep. It had been a while since we'd last visited the red building, and there was a bathroom in the surveillance room that needed a good cleaning. The surveillance room was usually locked, and I'd never been inside before. When my sister and I walked in, the first thing we noticed was a wall of monitors, each displaying the footage from security cameras all around the building. We had a bit of fun with it, taking turns staying in the surveillance room while the other made faces or silly gestures in front of the cameras in other rooms. I should mention that my sister and I have always had a close relationship, and we've always been a bit weird, laughing at dumb jokes and trying to scare each other. Eventually, my mom scolded us for goofing off and assigned us actual jobs. After about an hour and a half of scrubbing, vacuuming, and everything else, we were almost done. My mom was in the break room kitchen, and my sister was hovering nearby. I was exhausted by this point and just wanted to lie down or do anything but work. I was watching my mom prepare the water to mop the kitchen when she asked me if I wanted to mop or go turn off the lights upstairs. So tired, all I could think about was avoiding work, so I decided to go upstairs and turn off the lights. I headed up the narrow stairs into the kitchen, and the layout of the upstairs was strange because it used to be an apartment building. There were 2 sets of stairs on opposite sides of the building, and I took the ones in the kitchen. The other set was near the entryway at the front door. At the top of the stairs, there was a hallway I always tried to avoid. So, I started going through the rooms, flipping off the lights one by one, thinking about how we still had 2 other buildings to clean. I was mentally blocking out everything around me, just focusing on flipping switches. But when I entered that hallway I usually avoided, I suddenly became more aware of my surroundings. Since I was little, I've always been afraid of the dark. So I started by turning off the lights in the offices that surrounded the hallway. I got a little carried away, and when I reached the light at the end of the hall, I jumped from a small step in one of the office doorways into the center of the hall. The ceiling in the hallway was really high, so the light switch was just a string hanging down. I grabbed the string and pulled it, and as soon as the room went dark, this wave of dread washed over me. Then, I heard a very soft grunt from behind me. It sounded like the release of air from someone's lungs when they pass away naturally, like their body just relaxes and lets go. The moment I heard that sound, my body went rigid with fear and adrenaline, and I started to sweat. It felt like if I turned around, I was going to die or something. Like whatever was behind me would consume me whole if I dared to look. I felt completely powerless and terrified, unsure of what was happening. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I stayed there any longer, something bad would happen. My instincts kicked in, and before I even knew it, I was running down the stairs, faster than I thought I could. I sprinted straight into the surveillance room, hoping my sister was in there, and I called out her name. No response. In my panic, I ran over to the monitors and started scanning for anyone nearby that I could reach out to. The first movement I saw was on the screen showing the stairs I had just come down. I saw my sister walking down them, wearing her coat and Boba Fett hat, with a mop in her hand. I let out a deep breath and collapsed onto the couch in the surveillance room. I was so relieved to see it was just my sister. I realized she'd scared me like she always did, and it made perfect sense. I figured she must have finished mopping the kitchen, followed me up the stairs, and then took the chance to spook me. After I calmed down, I walked into the kitchen, where I saw my mom and sister chatting. I leaned against the island counter and told my sister she scared me. She looked at me, confused, and asked, "What?" I repeated myself, and she asked, "When did I scare you?" I explained that she came up behind me upstairs while I was turning off the lights, and I laughed, asking if I looked dumb running down the stairs. But neither my mom nor my sister were laughing. They just stared at me with confused expressions, so I asked them what was wrong. My sister began to explain that she had been downstairs talking to my mom the whole time I was upstairs turning off the lights. I told her I knew she was lying because I saw her on the cameras walking down the stairs. I even described what I saw. She was holding a mop and wearing both a hat and a coat. That's when my mom spoke up, saying my sister wasn't lying and that they had really been talking. At that point, I started thinking my mom was in on the joke too. So I told my sister to follow me to the surveillance room, and I pointed to the exact monitor where I saw her walking down the stairs. That's when she told me that she had taken off her coat as soon as we walked into the building and hadn't put it back on since. She also said she only walked down the stairs once with the mop, and that was much earlier. I was completely confused and a little scared. When we packed up to leave and got into the car, my sister told me about doppelgangers. I had never heard of them before, and to be honest, it only made everything scarier for me. I tried to think of every possible way to rationalize what happened, but nothing added up. At first, I thought maybe the footage wasn't live, but then I remembered how my sister and I had been playing with the cameras earlier. Maybe I was just paranoid from being in the dark, but the feeling I had was real. I still don't fully understand what happened, and I often wonder what would have happened if I turned around instead of running. I know some people won't believe me, but I'm thankful for the ones who don't think I'm crazy because they've experienced the same thing. I've been working at this nursing home for about a year and a half now, mostly doing cleaning and food service. I usually work late shifts, and recently, some strange things have started happening, especially in one part of the building. I can promise this is all true. I used to be a skeptic about these kinds of things, but after working here, I've had a change of heart. It all started one night when I came in for my usual late shift. For context, I'm also pregnant, which adds a layer of complexity to these stories. Late shifts involve cleaning the dining rooms, the kitchens, and handling the laundry for the day. It's a pretty big facility, and I always work alone during these shifts. There are 2 dining rooms, each seating at least 70 people, 1 kitchen, and 1 laundry room with those big industrial washers and dryers, so there's always a lot of cleaning to do. That night, I was sweeping the floor in the first dining room before I planned to mop. That's when I noticed a horrible smell, one that made me nauseous. At first, I thought maybe the cooks had left some rotten meat in the trash, but when I checked, all the trash bins had already been emptied. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the smell was coming from somewhere, so I decided to follow it. I walked past the kitchen, down the hallway leading to the rooms, and into the east wing of the building, where there are only 5 residents. This part of the building hasn't been renovated yet, so many of the rooms are vacant. The smell led me all the way to the end of the hall, where there was a room I knew was empty, room 218. I recognized it right away, and I was certain no one lived there. The foul odor was coming from under the door. I figured it was probably just some trash left behind by the morning cleaning staff. They sometimes forget to take things with them, so I thought I'd throw it out myself. We have a master key that opens all the rooms for fire safety reasons, so I unlocked the door. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell hit me full force, and it almost made me gag. I quickly covered my nose and went into the room, but as soon as I did, I noticed how cold it was. It felt like the AC had been running non-stop in there, and I immediately felt uncomfortable, almost like I shouldn't be in there. I searched around for the source of the smell, but all I found was an empty closet and bathroom. It seemed odd, so I thought maybe it was a dead animal stuck in the walls, something I'd need to report to my manager. I closed the door and locked it behind me, heading down the hall to continue with my work. But as I walked away, I heard a loud knock on the door that stopped me dead in my tracks. A cold chill ran down my spine as I turned back to face the door. I was certain no one had been inside. It had just been me. Then, I heard it again, but this time the knock was much louder, hitting the door twice as hard as before. I felt my face go pale. Being pregnant and definitely more on the nervous side, I couldn't take it anymore. I just started running down the hall as fast as I could. Whatever was happening in that room, I had no idea, but I knew something wasn't right, and I had every reason to be scared. I rushed back to the kitchen and immediately dialed 911. I was convinced someone had broken in and was messing with me. I explained the situation to the operator, and they assured me a police officer was only 2 minutes away. I breathed a sigh of relief and waited by the front doors. When the officer finally arrived, I took him to the room and explained everything. He went down the hall to check it out, cleared the room, and came back to tell me there was no one there. The room was still locked, and the windows were untouched. He said there was no smell either. I was shocked. Just minutes earlier, I could have sworn I smelled rotting meat and heard knocks on the door. I figured maybe it was just my tiredness and pregnancy brain playing tricks on me. The officer filed a report and left, but I still felt uneasy as I finished up my shift. This was the first time I'd ever experienced anything paranormal. The second time happened on another late shift. I was in the laundry room, just finishing up for the night and folding clothes, lost in my own thoughts. The room has these large windows, and since it was dark, I could see my own reflection in the glass. I looked down at the laundry for a moment, and when I looked back up, my heart stopped. An old man with dark black eyes was staring back at me, smiling. I screamed and turned around, thinking maybe it was a resident trying to mess with me, but to my horror, no one was there. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I looked around the room, then out into the hall, but there was nobody there either. I called out, but no answer came, and I suddenly felt sick to my stomach. I hurried to finish the laundry and locked up the room. But as I was locking the door, I caught a glimpse of an elderly man standing at the end of the hall in my peripheral vision. I turned to look, and it was the same man who had been behind me moments earlier. He was standing there, smiling, with eyes that were gray and black. He didn't look familiar at all. He was tall, heavy-set, and wearing jeans and a white t-shirt tucked into them. He was a bald, elderly man, just standing there and smiling at me. The smile was so unsettling that it sent a chill through my entire body. I thought maybe we had a new resident, and my manager had forgotten to mention it, so I called out to him. "Hello, sir. Do you need anything? I'm Belle, and I'm working the night shift. It's nice to meet you," I said, trying to keep my anxiety in check, but he just kept standing there, grinning. "If you need anything, feel free to call the staff phone." "Okay, I'll be over in no time," I said, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. He didn't respond, just continued to smile. I smiled back, awkwardly waved, and said, "Have a good night, sir. Feel free to call me if you need anything." "Okay." I hurried away, eager to get back to the staff room, but just as I entered, the phone started blaring. I looked at the caller ID, and to my horror, it was coming from room 218. My heart sank, but I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe it was just a new resident, too shy to speak. I hesitated but finally answered the phone. "Hello, sir? How can I help you tonight?" There was a low, disturbing growl on the other end, and it was anything but human. I froze, terrified, and before I could say anything else, the line went to static. "Hello? Hello?" I said shakily, but the phone just went to dial tone. I sat there, feeling my heart pound in my throat, not sure what to do next. According to the safety protocols, I had to check on the resident. Even though every instinct in my body told me to avoid the situation, I reluctantly walked down the east wing, my heart hammering in my chest. When I reached room 218, I knocked on the door and called out to see if the resident was okay. There was no answer. I knocked again, but still nothing. Anxiety gripped me. What if something had happened to the resident? That growl definitely wasn't human, but I was pregnant and hesitant to barge in and risk being attacked by who knows what. I turned around to grab the phone from the staff room, but as I did, I heard the door behind me creak open slowly. My heart skipped a beat, and I cautiously walked over to it. "Hello? Sir, are you all right in there?" I called out, but there was no response. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open, half expecting someone or something to jump out at me. But when I stepped inside, the room was empty. No one was there, and there was nothing that suggested anyone lived in the room. It was just bare, completely empty, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I searched the room, and that awful smell of rotten meat filled the air again. And then I heard it, an ear-piercing, low, and cackling laugh that seemed to slice through my ears like knives. It was so deep and chilling that I felt like I was going to lose control. I bolted out of the room so fast, not even bothering to close the door behind me. As I ran, my mind raced. Am I going crazy? I thought. I could have sworn I wasn't alone in there, but there was no one. What the hell is going on? I didn't finish my shift. No way. I just grabbed my stuff and left early, too scared to even stay another second. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it. As a soon-to-be single mom, and with my pregnancy, I had no choice but to stay at the nursing home until I went on maternity leave. My husband had passed away a few months ago, killed by a drunk driver. He was supposed to come home that night to cook dinner, and I had just gotten my positive pregnancy test. He never even got to know he was going to be a dad. Anyway, I was stuck there for a while, and I think that's where I'll leave it for now. If you'd like to hear more of my experiences, please feel free to leave a comment below. I've definitely got more to share. Thanks for listening. In the late spring of 2017, I set out on a long-awaited camping trip out west. The trip had been almost 2 years in the making, and it would be my first opportunity to camp with firearms. The drive to the location was an enjoyable experience, and I learned a lot about that part of the country that I hadn't known before. When I arrived, I parked my truck and informed my contact that I'd made it safely. We went over my agenda one last time, and I began the long hike to my campsite. The first day passed quietly. The weather was so perfect that I slept under the stars next to my fire. The freedom I felt was invigorating, especially after all the restrictions I was used to back home. The next day was much like the first, leisurely and full of enjoyment as I took in the wildlife around me. Around 1 p.m., I finally stumbled upon the spot I'd hoped to camp. A quick survey of the area confirmed it was the right choice. Before long, I had everything set up and was cooking my lunch. After eating, I felt myself getting drowsy, so I decided to take the opportunity to do some shooting. After all, that was one of the reasons I was out here. About 200 yards from camp, I found a dry creek bed. It seemed like the safest place to shoot. I set up a few steel targets and began letting rounds fly. The feeling was pure elation. I thought to myself, this must be how the mountain men lived. After going through a box of 7.62, I was reloading my SKS when I heard gunshots echoing through the hills around me. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. The shots kept coming as I searched. It sounded like multiple guns firing, which made me a little uneasy. I decided to head back to camp, sensing from the sound of the shots that I might not be welcome. It's a decision I still regret and thank myself for at the same time. Back at camp, I started thinking about what I'd have for dinner. The shooting stopped soon after I got back, and I assumed the shooters had moved on. I figured the evening would be quiet from here on out. Once I finished cleaning my guns, something that took about an hour, I laid back and stared at the fire. I found myself nodding off again. Instead of preparing something elaborate, I decided to snack on a sleeve of crackers and some bacon-flavored easy cheese. The sun was beginning to slip behind the trees, and I took this as a sign to crawl off to bed for an early night. It was completely dark when a noise awakened me. I jolted up and peeked out of my tent. Nothing was there. I figured it was a dream and laid back down. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard it again. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the night. Next to hearing a rabbit being killed by a predator, it was the worst sound I'd ever heard. The screams came again, but this time was followed by a female voice screaming for help. Things got real in that moment. I felt a shiver through my body. What was I going to do? I briefly considered grabbing my rifle and running off into the dark. It was clear by now where the sounds were coming from, the same direction the shots had been coming from earlier. Common sense won out and I stayed where I was. One more scream for help came and was followed by a single gunshot, and I laid frozen in terror, wondering what to do until the sun rose the next morning. My feelings of freedom and power were gone now. I waited minute after minute for the dawn so I could escape the coming death I had convinced myself was coming. With the sunrise, my kit was packed in record time and I was on my way back to a place I perceived as oppressive, or anywhere for that matter. Anywhere but there. A trip which had taken me in a day and a half to make just a few days before took less than one to return from. It was a miracle I'd make it back at all. Every few minutes, I'd turn around, a rifle gripped tightly in my hand, looking for some imaginary pursuers. I arrived back in my truck just after dark and turned for home, never happier to be returning. After the relief began to wear off, the guilt began to sit in. As far as I could tell, I had heard a woman in need for help. Being murdered perhaps, and I did nothing about it, not a thing. For the entire drive back, a war waged between my ego and common sense. 1 second, I hated myself, calling myself a coward, and the next, you were obviously outnumbered. There's nothing you could do. The undeniable facts are that all those things are true. I was indeed a coward, scared as a child that sees his first horror movie. But at the same time, running out into the pitch dark after an unknown number of assailants would have been very, very stupid. Though it's still the sting of my ego I feel the strongest to this day. Any man could tell you why. Coward or hero, none of this amounted to much. The real question is if I was going to report what I'd witnessed. Witnessed? That was a word that would undo my great act of virtue. I really didn't witness anything. I heard a few screams and shots out in the middle of nowhere, hardly a groundbreaking indictment. Without any real evidence, I'd be no more than a nuisance to the cops, and that was it. And my punishment? It's been this unending shame of picking logic and reason over common decency. It'll be some months until I would discover the facts that surrounded this incident, and for some time I was too terrified at what I would find. Nonetheless, a day came when I was finally able to summon the courage to seek out the truth, and it turned out to be a mixed bag somewhat. To be brief, I just happened to be camping a mile away from an outlaw biker gang. Earlier in that day, they had arrived at the site that they used in the past to shoot their less than legal firearms. Unfortunately, they had also abducted a female backpacker. After horribly abusing her for several hours, they set her free. She fled from their campsite. This must have been the screams that I heard for help, only to be shocked and left for dead. Most of the time, this would be where the terrible story would end. However, by some act of God, the backpacker clung to life. Somehow she made her way back to the highway and found help. After a week in the hospital, she was released. The bikers knew that they were caught and took deals that will see most of them serving the remainder of their lives in prison. Although I was generally happy to hear the victim was alive, the thought of what-ifs haunt me to this day. I never told anyone about this incident. Choosing to use this throwaway account means I probably never will. If you end up reading this and thinking me as a low-life coward, I really don't blame you. I didn't tell this story for folks like you. This account is for those who believe it's best to avoid getting involved in other people's problems. I understand the desire to steer clear of conflict. Many have been punished for trying to do the right thing. If you choose to help someone in need, you might end up as one of those people. Your life could be shattered as a result. But I can tell you from personal experience that it's nothing compared to the burden of guilt you'll carry for the rest of your life. Simple, we're all here together. If you're able, you should help others who are struggling. Put yourself in your neighbor's shoes. You might be the only one who can make the difference between their survival or their death. I live on the outskirts of a small town in Wyoming, where owning a large plot of land is more achievable than in most other states. My house is modest, but it's perfect for living alone. This incident happened 4 years ago in 2019, during a spring where it seemed like it rained every day. It was a Sunday, and I was off work, just relaxing and watching TV. Around 6 or 7 p.m., I heard an unexpected knock at my door. It was hard to hear over the rain, but when I opened it, I was caught off guard by a random guy standing there. He wasn't a mailman or anyone I recognized, just someone I hadn't expected to see, especially out here. This area is isolated, and it's rare for anyone to just show up without notice. "How can I help you?" I asked. The guy, looking to be in his late 20s, explained that he had been camping in the nearby woods and had run into some trouble. He needed a place to stay for the night. Considering how far out my place is, I figured if he wasn't lying, it made sense for him to show up at my door, since I was the nearest place for miles. Plus, the rain was really coming down, which made me feel sorry for him. But even so, I wasn't comfortable letting a stranger into my home. I offered to let him use my phone to arrange a ride into town, but he turned me down. After a brief exchange, he left. I watched him walk down the dirt road for a bit. Then he veered off and disappeared into the woods. It struck me as strange, but I didn't think much of it and went back to watching TV. Time passed, and it had to be at least 2 hours later when I noticed an orange glow through the window in my backyard. I stood up, moved the curtain, and looked outside. Through the rain and fog, I saw a small campfire flickering beneath a large tree in the woods behind my house. There was a figure standing near it, holding something, but I couldn't tell if he was facing toward the house or the woods. After a moment, I closed the curtains and grabbed my phone to call the police, letting them know about the person outside. I knew it would probably take about an hour for them to arrive, and the person wasn't causing any harm, but I wanted them gone before I went to bed. Once I hung up, I checked the window again. The fire was still burning, but the figure was gone. That's when I heard footsteps approaching the house. I ran to the other window and caught sight of him walking past with the hunting rifle in his hand before he turned the corner and went to the front door. He banged on it a few times, then it went quiet. I grabbed my self-defense handgun from the hallway closet and hid around the wall, still trying to process the situation I was in. He hit the door again. This time I could tell it was with the stock of his rifle, nearly breaking a panel out of the door. In this moment, I could only think that I had to try to deter him immediately, before it becomes life or death for one of us. I shot around toward the edge of the door frame, deafening myself for a second as the shot rang through the house. When my hearing came back, all I heard was the rain pouring down. No footsteps, banging, or yelling. I gathered up courage after 5 minutes of no sounds and looked out the peephole, seeing an empty porch and outside in the yard were clear footprints going away from the house. He must have run right after the shot. During the couple seconds, I couldn't hear. Police did a thorough search and found some strange details. Out by where the campfire was, they found a duffel bag with evidence of it having been buried nearby and likely dug up just hours before the attack. What they told me is that it was most likely a burglary kit or possibly even a murder kit that was planted in advance with the intent to be dug up and used later on. This means whoever attacked me had planned it and had been right outside my house at least once before that night. Why he attacked me specifically is not known, and who and where he is currently is still no closer to being figured out than it was 4 years ago. I still live in the same house and worry every day that he might come back. I have a phobia, one that goes by a few names: scopophobia or ophthalmophobia, basically the fear of being watched. What that means for me is that I have this strange compulsion. Whenever I see a doorway, a window, or any kind of surface where someone could be hiding, my mind immediately pictures a face staring out at me. I can't help but imagine what I would do in that situation. What could I do? And you'll soon understand why I have this fear. Let me get into the story. I'll do my best to recall all the details, though my mind has repressed a lot of it. Around June of 2016, my mother and I were living in a tiny apartment. There was no basement or attic, but there was a small crawl space beneath the floor of my bedroom closet. I never once looked inside. Some people might have been too curious not to, but my imagination had already concocted all the worst possibilities. So, I figured I'd leave whatever skeletons or ghosts were in there for the next tenants. It was a cozy apartment, small but just right for the two of us. We had a peaceful time there until the strange noises began. It wasn't anything too alarming, just the occasional bump in the night, and especially scratching. My mum shrugged it off as rats in the walls, and as long as they stayed where they were, I didn't see any reason to address it. A week or two passed, and I had grown used to the sounds. In fact, it even started to feel oddly comforting. After all, I wasn't a fan of silence. That was until one night when I woke up to a completely different noise. A rolling sound, eerily similar to the noise my closet door made when I opened it. I blinked my eyes open and glanced over, but it was too dark to make anything out. I thought I saw something move, but I knew how the mind can play tricks in the dark. There was only one way to be sure, so I flicked on my lamp. When the light came on, I expected to see nothing but a closet full of coats. But what I saw was far worse. It was an eye, no, not just an eye, half of someone's face barely visible through the tiny crack in the closet door. He didn't even flinch when I caught him. No smile, no fear, just watching. My heart pounded harder than I ever thought possible, and I wished I had screamed or grabbed some mace or done anything. But I just froze, staring back at him until I couldn't hold it in any longer. I broke down in sobs, and I think I tried to ask him, "What do you want?" But my voice was lost in the tears. He opened the door wider, and I could see his whole body. I won't describe it. I've spent 2 years trying to forget his face. He said, "Shoo," and I felt my breath leave me at that moment. Hearing him speak made it all real. It wasn't some twisted hallucination anymore. I sat up, pressing my back against the wall. "It's okay," he said, his voice disturbingly cheerful. Just thinking about it sends chills down my spine. This is when I finally had the courage to just run out of the room. This creep knew my name too. My fucking name. My mom, still half asleep while she called the police, thought that I had imagined it. Of course, by the time that the police had got there, he was long gone. All that was left of him was that damn crawl space. I never did look inside, but writing this now, I kind of wish I did. Having some sort of proof of this would, I don't know, maybe comfort me, because at least you all would know that I'm not crazy. Apparently, he had been living in there. For how long? I don't know. But the officers who first arrived on the scene said that there were tally marks inside the crawl space, and I really did not want to know how many. I didn't want to know whether he was marking days or weeks. I just wanted to leave that fucking apartment, and eventually we did. The police never did find him. Well, not for certain. They thought they found a homeless man who matched his description, but he was apparently unresponsive. I've always thought that they didn't take it all that seriously. They just thought that he was a squatter even after I told them that he knew my name. They thought that given how long he'd been seemingly squatting, he had probably just heard my name through the floorboards or something. Since that night, Mihir has been the face that I always see when there's an open door or closet. It's grown more distorted as time has gone on, but I can always make out a part of his pursed lips as if he's still shushing me even now. It's gotten easier with time, but I don't think that it'll ever leave me completely. Anyways, my guess that we never really actually had rats. Something unbelievable happened to me last year. It started out as just another typical school year. I was nearing the end of my final 2 semesters before graduation, my mind preoccupied with what life would look like after school. I guess that's why I didn't notice what was happening around me for quite a while. One morning, not long before the first term ended, I had to make a quick stop to pick up my shoes from the repair shop. I wasn't paying much attention to anyone else in the store. After paying and grabbing my shoes, I went on with my errands. As I was walking toward the used bookstore, I happened to notice a young blonde man on the opposite side of the street. For some reason, he caught my eye, and there was something oddly familiar about him. I shrugged it off and continued on. The bookstore didn't have much of a selection, so after browsing for a few minutes, I made my way back to campus. It was then that I saw the blonde man again, standing outside a gas station and sipping a soda. I thought it was probably just another coincidence, another person going about their day, but something about it stuck with me. I pushed the thought aside and went home. My house was a small 2-bedroom place just across from the school, so it wasn't unusual to see other students walking by. However, it became strange when I saw the same blonde man sitting on the steps of the school that afternoon. I had been home for several hours, and as I glanced out of my living room window, there he was. This strange pattern was starting to get under my skin. I tried once again to dismiss the situation. Sure, he could just be another student, but the fact that I kept seeing him multiple times in one day when I had never noticed him before was starting to worry me. Since he wasn't causing any harm, sitting across the street, I tried to shake it off and get back to my chores. Later, when I saw that he was no longer there, I realized how paranoid I had been and finally managed to stop thinking about the blonde man. His presence wouldn't return until that Monday. I had been walking to class and noticed him again, this time sitting with a group of a few other males talking to each other. After standing for a moment, watching him to see if he looked over to me and never seeing him doing so, I went on to my next class. Even though my focus was important to the class, I couldn't think of anything else but that man. The chance that I was being followed struck me as hilarious at that time. For some unknown reason, the man and I just happened to be in the same place at the same time. This was the only conclusion I could accept. And until the end of the term, a few weeks later, it remained the most logical reason available. During the holiday break one evening, myself and a few other girls were hanging around at my house. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a person sitting across the street on the school steps. To my shock, it was the blonde man. This was the first time I would be unable to retreat to a place of justification in my mind. The school was closed for the break, as were the dorms. No logical excuse for his presence existed. Just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind in seeing someone who wasn't there, I asked one of the girls to come to the window. I asked her if she knew who he was, or if she had a name, but she claimed to have never seen him before. She must have seen the concern on my face because she asked me if I was okay. Thinking weakly on my feet, I changed the subject. At this point, I was unsure if my growing fear was justified, and I didn't want to drag someone else into a possibly embarrassing situation. We went back to our other friends and enjoyed the evening festivities, but all along, the unknown blonde man lurked in the back of my mind. Things would go back to normal somewhat until the weeks following the new year, when an already strange situation would become an outright farce. On an ordinary Monday morning, I was preparing myself for class when I heard a shuffling on my front porch. Acting before I thought, I threw open the door just in time to see the backside of a blonde-haired male running away from my house. I hadn't even had a moment to process what I was seeing when I witnessed the individual being struck down in traffic. The car that hit him had been going over 50 miles an hour, and he was supposedly killed on impact. For his sake, I hoped this was true. The moment police became involved, I had to make the decision as to whether I would mention all the strange things that had occurred leading up to this. Considering I, myself, was unsure about what had been happening, I made the choice to say as little as possible. I simply told them that I saw the man running across the street and get hit. Involving myself any further didn't seem right. After all, I still had no proof that the man was stalking me. Smearing the name of a man I didn't know struck me as a bridge too far. The following afternoon, I made a discovery that would finally put all my doubts to rest forever. Mixed in with the rest of my regular mail was an unmarked folded piece of white paper. Reading it would provide me with many a sleepless night. Simply stated, I see you every day and I know you see me. Why do you ignore me? There was no way I could deny what was happening now. The question still remained as to why I was chosen to be the target of his obsession. That answer wouldn't be discovered until the end of the semester. A group of students and I were sitting together and discussing our time in the university when one of the girls, a small and quiet engineering major, mentioned how unfortunate it was that Mark didn't make it the last few months to graduation. What she said next would show me just how self-centered I had become over the last 4 years. I don't know if you knew it, Lindsay, but he had a major crush on you. You were all he talked about. Isn't it so crazy that the place he was hit wasn't 25 yards from your house? I felt like I'd been hit by a truck myself and was unable to speak at first. Yeah, that's crazy. Life is strange like that. I felt like I had been hit by a truck and was unable to speak at first. Yeah, that's crazy. Life is strange like that. This was all I could think to say. The rush of information I had just received left me utterly stunned. I excused myself from the group and ran back to my house, locking the door behind me. Her words had triggered a flood of memories I didn't even realize I had forgotten. The blonde man, he wasn't a stranger. He had been in my very first class at the university, and he had been kind and friendly towards me. He had been incredibly helpful with my coursework. But after I joined my sorority, everything changed. My circle of friends shifted dramatically, including the guys I spoke to and dated. Once that class ended, I moved on, leaving him in the past. We hadn't exchanged a word since my freshman year. I'm not sure whether my gradual indifference turned what could have been a harmless crush into an unhealthy obsession, or if a kind and caring young man was simply trying to reconnect with an old friend. I've come to realize how easily it is to move on with life, leaving behind not only the people who once meant so much, but also the memories of them. The moment I caught his eyes in the rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a grave mistake. What had started as a simple act of kindness on a rainy night was rapidly spiraling into a nightmare. As we drove further into the unknown, one thought kept pounding in my head. I need to get out of this car, no matter what. It was past midnight, and I'd been driving for hours. The rain had started as a light drizzle, but had quickly turned into a relentless downpour, blurring the road and making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. My windshield wipers were working overtime, and I was contemplating pulling over to wait out the storm when I saw him. He was standing at the side of the road, drenched to the bone, thumb outstretched. In the split second it took me to decide, I thought of all the times I'd been stuck in a similar situation and wished someone would stop for me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pulled over. He jogged to the passenger side, and I unlocked the door. He slid in, bringing with him the smell of rain and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Thanks, man," he said, pushing his wet hair out of his eyes. "I thought I'd be stuck out here all night." "No problem," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "Where are you headed?" "Just the next town over, if that's all right," he said, his voice unervingly calm for someone who'd been standing in the pouring rain. I nodded, trying to focus on the road. The rain was showing no signs of stopping, and I had to squint to make out the yellow lines ahead. "I'm Mark," I offered, hoping some small talk would help me stay alert. "John," he replied simply. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic swish of the wipers the only sound in the car. I kept sneaking glances at him, something about John making me uneasy. He was staring straight ahead, his face partially obscured in shadow. "So, what brings you out on a night like this?" I asked, trying to break the oppressive silence. John shrugged. "Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do, you know?" I nodded, though I didn't quite understand. "Who hitchhikes in the middle of a storm like this?" "What about you?" he asked. "Long drive." "Yeah, coming back from visiting family. Should have gotten a hotel for the night, but I wanted to get home." John hummed in response, his gaze still fixed ahead. The rain seemed to intensify, if that was even possible. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "Crazy weather," I said, trying to fill the silence again. "Yeah," John replied, his voice low. "Perfect night for a drive, though. No one else on the road." Something in his tone made my skin crawl. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, suddenly very aware of how isolated we were. "So where exactly is this next town?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. John shifted in his seat. "Oh, not too far now. Just keep driving straight." I frowned. We've been on this road for a while now, and I hadn't seen any signs for upcoming towns. In fact, I was starting to think we'd missed a turn somewhere. Are you sure? I asked. I don't remember the next town being this far. John turned to look at me then, and in the dim light of the dashboard, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. There was a hardness there, a glint of something dangerous. I said, "Keep driving," he said, all pretense of friendliness gone from his voice. My heart started racing. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe I should just let you out here." Before I could finish, I felt something press against my side. I glanced down and saw the glint of a knife blade. "Keep driving," John said, each word punctuated with menace. My mouth went dry. I pressed down on the gas pedal, my mind racing. How had I gotten myself into this situation? What did he want? We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The rain continued to pour down, isolating us in a bubble of fear and uncertainty. "Turn right up here," John suddenly commanded. I looked ahead and saw a small dirt road leading off into darkness. My stomach dropped. There was no way this led to a town. "Please," I said, hating how my voice shook. "Just take my wallet, my phone, whatever you want. You don't have to do this." John laughed, a harsh sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, but I do. Now turn." With shaking hands, I turned onto the dirt road. The car bounced and slid in the mud, the headlights barely cutting through the darkness ahead. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. Could I crash the car? Jump out? But with the knife at my side, any sudden movement could be fatal. "Stop here," John said after we'd gone about a mile down the road. I brought the car to a stop, the engine idling. We were surrounded by dense forest on both sides. No signs of civilization in sight. "Get out," he ordered. "Please." I tried one last time. "You don't have to do this." The pressure of the knife increased. I said, "Get out." Slowly, I opened the door and stepped out into the rain. It was coming down in sheets now, soaking me to the bone in seconds. John got out on the other side, the knife still pointed at me. "Walk," he said, gesturing towards the woods. As I took my first step, a plan started to form in my mind. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was all I had. We walked for what felt like miles, the mud sucking at my shoes, branches whipping at my face. John stayed a few paces behind me, occasionally prodding me with the knife to keep moving. Finally, we came to a small clearing. John told me to stop. "Turn around," he said. This was it, my one chance. As I turned, I pretended to slip in the mud. I fell backwards, my arms flailing. In the split second of confusion, I kicked out hard, catching John in the knee. He yelled in pain and surprise, the knife falling from his hand. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I could hear John behind me, cursing and stumbling. I had no idea where I was going, just that I had to get away. The rain made it hard to see, hard to breathe, but I didn't stop. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the woods and onto a road. By some miracle, a car was approaching. I waved my arms frantically, probably looking like a madman. The car slowed, and I saw the worried face of an elderly woman peering out at me. "Please," I gasped, "help me." She must have seen the panic in my eyes because, without hesitation, she unlocked the doors. My hands were trembling so violently that I could barely close the door after I climbed in. "Drive," I begged. "Please, just drive." As we sped away, I glanced back at the woods. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, watching us leave. But then we turned a corner, and it was gone. The woman, bless her, took me straight to the police station. I gave my statement, still shaking, still drenched from the rain. They never found John. The woods were searched, but there was no sign of him. Sometimes, I wonder if he was ever real or just a manifestation of my worst fears, brought to life by the darkness of that stormy night. But then I remember the cold press of the knife against my side, the gleam in his eyes, and I know it was all too real. I don't drive at night anymore unless I have no choice, and I never pick up hitchhikers. Some acts of kindness just aren't worth the risk because sometimes the real monsters aren't lurking in the woods or hiding under our beds. Sometimes they're sitting right beside us, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was the summer of 2012, a scorching hot day in California. I was 12 years old, living in the mountain areas of California with my parents. At that time, I didn't have a cell phone, so I spent most of my days playing outside in the dirt. On this particular day, things were especially bad. My parents were in the middle of a toxic marriage, and their constant fighting had become the norm. This day, however, the fight escalated so much that my dad left, and my mom went straight to sleep, completely intoxicated. I was old enough to understand not to get involved, so I stayed outside to avoid the chaos. I was playing in the backyard when I started to hear a woman crying. At first, I thought it might have been my mom waking up and getting upset again. Her bedroom window was always open, and it faced the backyard, so it made sense to me. I shrugged it off and went back to what I was doing. But then, about 2 minutes later, I heard the cry again. Only this time it was louder. I began to feel uneasy as I realized the sound was coming from the front of the house, not behind me. I peeked around the corner and looked down the street, only to be faced with a horrifying sight. A grown woman was walking down the street. She was completely naked, covered in blood, and crying with a scream that chilled me to my core. My first thought was, I need to get inside. But I hesitated, and that gave her time to notice me. She began speed walking up to my house. I was frozen in fear as she approached, her cries growing louder and her breathing ragged. As she came closer, I could see that blood was actively pouring from her stomach. I ran up the stairs and started screaming for my mom. The woman shouted, "Wait, I don't want to hurt you. Please, I need help." Tears filled my eyes, and I was shaking from fear. At the top of the stairs, I stopped in my tracks and said, "Okay, sit on the stairs, and I'll go get my mom." She responded, "Thank you so much. I've been attacked, and he's still looking for me." Being a naive 12-year-old, I found some comfort in knowing that she seemed like a normal woman who had been hurt. But the thought that an attacker might still be nearby sent a wave of concern through me. I ran inside to wake up my mom, but she was angry at me for interrupting her sleep and accusing me of lying. She came outside with me anyways, and I watched her face lose color, and she realized there really was a bloody woman on the porch. My mom yelled at me to go grab the woman one of her old t-shirts and to call 911. I brought my mom's t-shirt, and she helped the woman get dressed. I called 911 on the house telephone and frantically explained what had happened. The operator asked me, "Sweetheart, are you there alone?" I responded, "No. My mom is here with me sitting next to the woman." The 911 operator took a deep breath and said, "This is what I need you to do. I need you to tell your mom the ambulance is on the way, and then tell her to get inside and lock all of your doors until the police and paramedics arrive." I was confused, and I once again explained to the operator that the woman was attacked and the attacker is out looking for her. The operator then said something that sent chills down my spine. "Sweetheart, she is the attacker. She stabbed her neighbor 37 times. He called first and was picked up about 30 minutes ago. Police have been looking for this woman for months, as this is not the first time she has attacked someone." It was at that moment that I looked outside and noticed that the woman was holding a box cutter in her left hand. I screamed at my mom to get inside now, which caused the woman to jump up and pull the box cutter towards my mom. My mother kicked her and ran inside. The woman banged and kicked at our door for the entire 15 minutes it took the police and ambulance to arrive. When they got there, she stopped and began to cry again. She attempted to tell the police that she had been attacked, but they obviously were not buying it. They put the woman in the ambulance, and the police handcuffed her to the railing of her bed. The sheriff called later that night and explained that the woman's stab wound on her stomach was done by her to make it look like she had truly been attacked. He had also said that this man, the neighbor, was the third victim of hers in the past few months, and that if we had waited any longer, we could have been next. I was given a stern talking to by the sheriff about how dangerous this could have gone and how I should never talk to strangers. It was hard to focus on him though because all I could hear in my head was the 911 operator saying, "Sweetheart, she is the attacker." The first night in our new house, I heard footsteps when everyone else was asleep. The second night, I found a door that hadn't been there before. By the third night, I knew with chilling certainty that we weren't alone in this place, and whatever was sharing our home didn't want us here. We had been so excited about the move. After years of cramped apartment living, Sarah and I had finally saved enough for a down payment on a house. It was an old Victorian, a bit run down but with good bones, as the realtor kept emphasizing. The price was surprisingly low for the neighborhood, but we didn't think twice. We were too excited about having space for our growing family. Sarah was 5 months pregnant with our first child. The first few days were a blur of unpacking and settling in. The house creaked and groaned, but we chalked it up to its age. "It's just settling," I tell Sarah when she mentioned hearing odd noises at night. I was so focused on getting everything ready for the baby that I hardly noticed the strange cold spots in certain rooms or the way the shadows seemed to shift in the corners of my vision. It was on the third night that things took a turn. I was up late, painting the nursery, when I heard it. Clear, distinct footsteps coming from the floor above. But that was impossible. We didn't have an attic. And Sarah was sound asleep in our second-floor bedroom, her heart steady. My heart, on the other hand, was racing. I crept up the stairs, paint roller still in hand. The footsteps had stopped. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the wall across from our bedroom, was a door that hadn't been there that morning. I stood frozen, staring at it. It was old, the wood darkened with age, with an ornate brass knob that gleamed in the dim light. Every instinct told me to turn around, to go back downstairs, to pretend I'd never seen it. But curiosity, that cursed human trait, pushed me forward. My hand shook as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch, sending a shiver down my spine. I took a deep breath and turned it slowly. The door creaked open, the sound echoing through the empty house. Beyond it was darkness, thick and impenetrable. The beam of my phone's flashlight barely seemed to make a dent in it. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened even to my own ears. "Is someone there?" No response, just that oppressive silence. I took a tentative step forward, then another. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The air felt thick, heavy with the musty smell of long disused spaces. Suddenly, my light fell on something that made my heart leap into my throat. A figure standing motionless in the darkness. I stumbled back. A cry of terror caught in my throat. But it wasn't a person. As my eyes adjusted, I realized it was a mannequin, dressed in what looked like clothes from another century. Around it were piles of boxes and old furniture, all covered in a thick layer of dust. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. It was just an old storage space, probably sealed up years ago and forgotten. Nothing sinister, nothing supernatural, just an oddity in an old house. I was about to turn back when something caught my eye. A glint of metal nestled among the boxes. Curiosity got the better of me once again, and I moved closer to investigate. It was a locket tarnished with age, but still beautiful. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. There was an inscription on the back, but it was too worn to make out. As I fumbled with the clasp, trying to open it, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps coming from behind me. I whirled around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But there was nothing there, just the open doorway leading back to the familiar hallway of our home. That should have been my cue to leave, to slam that door shut and never look back. But I didn't. Instead, I pocketed the locket and continued exploring. The room was larger than I'd initially thought. Stretching back into shadows, my light couldn't penetrate. I moved deeper past more mannequins and piles of antique furniture. The further I went, the colder it got, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. That's when I heard it, a whisper so faint I almost missed it. "Get out." I spun around, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Get out." The whisper had become a roar, seeming to come from everywhere at once. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, back through the maze of forgotten things, towards the door. But it wasn't there. Where the door had been was now just more wall, more darkness. Panic seized me. I pounded on the walls, screaming for help. But my cries seemed swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. Just as despair was about to overwhelm me, my hand brushed against something. The doorknob. With a sob of relief, I turned it and burst through, slamming the door behind me. I stood there in the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart racing. Had that really happened? Or had I fallen asleep while painting and had some kind of vivid nightmare? But the weight of the locket in my pocket told me it had been real. All too real. I stumbled back to the bedroom, my mind reeling. Should I wake Sarah? Tell her what had happened? But how could I explain something I barely understood myself? In the end, exhaustion won out. I crawled into bed, telling myself I'd figure it out in the morning. But when morning came, the door was gone. The wall was smooth, unbroken, as if the events of the night had been nothing but a dream. Even the locket had vanished from my pocket. I tried to convince myself that's all it had been, a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and paint fumes. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was in our house, something that didn't want us here. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences became our new normal. Items would move on their own. Doors would slam shut without warning. And always, there were the footsteps at night. Sarah noticed too. I'd catch her staring at the walls sometimes, a look of confusion and fear on her face. But we didn't talk about it. It was as if speaking about the strange events would make them more real, more dangerous. Then came the night I woke to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. Panic gripped me as I searched the house, calling her name. I was about to call the police when I heard it. Her voice, muffled but unmistakable, coming from behind that damned door that had reappeared in the hallway. I didn't hesitate this time. I flung the door open and plunged into the darkness beyond. "Sarah," I yelled, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. John, help me." Her voice sounded distant, frightened. I ran towards the sound, barely aware of my surroundings. Objects loomed out of the darkness, more mannequins, old furniture, things I couldn't even identify. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was finding Sarah. I found her in what looked like an old nursery, surrounded by creepy antique dolls and a rusted crib. She was curled up in a rocking chair, her hands protectively over her swollen belly. "Sarah," I breathed, relief washing over me. "What happened? How did you get here?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know. I woke up and I was just here. John, what is this place? What's happening to us?" Before I could answer, a cold wind swept through the room. The dolls' heads turned, their glassy eyes fixing on us. And then we heard it, that voice again, no longer a whisper, but a bone-chilling shriek. "This is our home." We ran, hand in hand. We fled through the twisting, impossible space of that hidden room. Behind us, we could hear something moving, following us. The air was thick with whispers and screams, the tortured echoes of 100 years of trapped souls. Somehow, we found our way back to the door. We burst through it, and I slammed it shut, pressing my weight against it as if that alone could keep the horrors at bay. We didn't spend another night in that house. We packed what we could and left, abandoning most of our belongings and the hope of recovering our down payment. Some things are worth more than money. Later, we learned the house's grim history, the tragic deaths, the disappearances, the string of owners who had fled in the night. "You were lucky," the local historian told us. "Lucky to have escaped. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps. I still feel the cold press of that locket in my pocket. And I wonder about the souls trapped in that hidden room. I pray they remain there, locked away in that house where reality bends and nightmares come to life. Because I know the truth now. Some houses are never truly empty, and some doors, once opened, can never really be closed again. The storm had come out of nowhere. 1 minute, the sky was a clear, inky black, and the next, rain lashed against my windshield, the wipers barely keeping up. I had been driving for hours on the back roads, trying to make it to my sister's house before midnight. But now, with visibility nearly gone, I had no choice but to pull over. That's when I saw it. A motel, barely visible through the sheets of rain. A neon sign flickered weakly. Valley Rest Motel. It looked abandoned. The paint was peeling, the parking lot cracked and overgrown in places. But at that moment, it was a lifeline. I pulled in and parked under the only working streetlight, grabbing my bag before sprinting to the office. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, shaking the water from my jacket. Behind the counter sat an old man, eyes milky with cataracts. He didn't look up. "Need a room," I said, my voice tight from the cold. The man turned his head slightly, as if acknowledging my presence, but said nothing. He simply slid a key across the counter, room 6, and turned back to whatever empty void he had been staring at before. "All right, then," I muttered, snatching the key and heading back into the rain. The room was exactly what I expected. Stained carpet, outdated wallpaper peeling at the corners, and a musty scent that told me it hadn't been aired out in years. But the bed looked clean enough, and at this hour, that was all I cared about. I locked the door, set my bag down, and collapsed onto the mattress, exhaustion seeping into my bones. That's when I noticed it. A chair in the corner, facing the bed. Nothing strange about that, except something about it felt wrong, as if someone had been sitting there just moments before I entered. The air around it felt used.
Stale.
Shaking off the unease, I pulled the covers over me, my limbs heavy with fatigue. Sleep came easily, too easily. I woke up to a sound. At first, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it, the soft creak of weight shifting in a chair. My pulse quickened. I turned my head slowly towards the corner. The chair was still empty, but it had moved. I sat up, breath caught in my throat. It was now angled slightly towards the bed, like someone had adjusted their position for a better view. My fingers gripped the blanket as I forced myself to scan the room. The door was still locked, the window closed. I was alone. A cold realization settled over me. I had been alone when I arrived, yes. But had I been alone while I slept? I reached for my bag, deciding right then that I would leave, storm or not. My fingers brushed against something that wasn't mine. A single, worn photograph lay atop my clothes. It was black and white, grainy. A picture of a motel room. This motel room. The same bed, the same wallpaper. And in the chair now angled towards me, sat a figure. Faceless, blurred, but unmistakably there. A weight settled over my chest. A suffocating pressure that made my skin crawl. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I turned my head, inch by inch, towards the chair. Empty. I didn't wait. I grabbed my bag and ran, flinging the door open to the cold night air. The rain had stopped. The parking lot was empty, but the neon sign above the motel? It was gone. No glow, no flickering letters, just darkness where Valley Rest Motel had been. I turned back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The motel was no longer there, only a stretch of overgrown road, and the quiet hum of the night, watching me, waiting. I stood frozen, trying to force my mind to make sense of what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. I turned in circles, scanning for any sign that I had simply gotten turned around, that the building still existed somewhere in the darkness. But it was gone, completely, as if it had never been there at all. A cold wind whipped through the trees, sending a shiver up my spine. I needed to get back to my car. I took a cautious step forward, my body still rigid with fear. Then another. The car was exactly where I had left it, but something about it looked Wrong. The windshield was completely clean, dry, despite the storm that had just passed. My own footprints in the wet pavement were the only disturbance in the otherwise undisturbed lot. I yanked the door open and slid inside, locking it immediately. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys. When I turned the ignition, the car roared to life, but the radio crackled on by itself, static filling the small space around me. Then, through the static, a voice. "Don't look back," I gasped, my breath hitching in my throat. I reached for the dial, twisting it off, but the voice persisted. A whisper now, urgent, desperate. "Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back." My fingers gripped the wheel so tightly they ached. I pressed the gas pedal and peeled out of the parking lot, my headlights cutting through the thick fog that had begun to creep in. My heart pounded with each passing second, each mile that put more distance between me and that place. Only when I saw the flickering lights of a distant gas station did I dare to slow down. My pulse was still racing as I pulled into the lot and parked under the harsh, sterile glow of the fluorescents. The familiar hum of reality seemed to return to me, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I exhaled. I turned off the engine and sat there for a long moment, gripping the wheel, grounding myself. Then, slowly, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The chair from the motel was in my back seat. As soon as I noticed his thumb sticking out from the side of the desolate highway, I knew I should have kept driving. But something about the way he stood there, his shoulders slumped in resignation, made me slow down. I had no idea that my momentary act of kindness would quickly spiral into a nightmare that would linger with me for years. I'd been driving for hours across the barren landscape of the American Southwest. The endless stretches of scrubland and distant mesas had lulled me into a daze, my mind wandering as the miles passed by. The hitchhiker appeared like a mirage, wavering in the heat on the horizon. As I neared him, his figure solidified, and I saw that he was a man in his early 30s, with weathered skin and clothes that clearly had seen better days. He seemed harmless enough, just another unfortunate soul on the road. I slowed down, rolling down the passenger window. The wave of hot air that hit me made me wince. "Where are you headed?" I called out. He jogged over with a relieved smile. "Anywhere but here, man. Just trying to make it to the next town." I paused, doubts from years of warnings flashing through my mind. But the intense heat left me with little choice. I couldn't just leave him out there. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the door. He tossed a battered backpack into the back seat and collapsed into the passenger seat with a heavy sigh. "Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver," he said, introducing himself as Mike. I shook his hand, feeling the rough calluses on his palm. "Tom, nice to meet you." We pulled back onto the empty highway. I couldn't help but glance at my new passenger. Up close, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his gaze flickered nervously around the car. "So, what brings you out here?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Mike gave a short, humorless chuckle. "It's a long story, friend. Let's just say I'm looking for a fresh start." I nodded, not wanting to pry. Everyone has their reasons, after all. For the next hour, we made casual conversation. Mike was surprisingly articulate for someone who looked like he had been living rough. He asked about my job, my family, and where I was headed. I found myself opening up to him more than I usually would to a stranger, his calm demeanor putting me at ease. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of orange and pink, I noticed a shift in Mike's behavior. His answers grew more clipped, and he kept glancing at the rearview mirror, his eyes darting nervously. "Everything okay?" I asked, sensing something was off. He jumped slightly, as if he'd forgotten I was there. "Yeah," he replied quickly. "Just keeping an eye out, you know?" I didn't know, but I nodded, trying to ignore the rising unease in my stomach. Suddenly, the discomfort that had been simmering in me flared into something much stronger. Something was off about this whole situation, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Look," Mike said abruptly, "I need you to take the next exit. I frowned. The next exit, but that's not towards the town. It's just a service road that just do it, he snapped, his previously friendly demeanor evaporating in an instant. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I think maybe it's time you got out, Mike. I can drop you off at the next rest stop. But I didn't finish the sentence. In a flash, Mike had pulled a knife from somewhere, the blade glinting wickedly in the fading sunlight. Take the exit, he growled, pressing the tip of the knife against my ribs. My mouth went dry, heart hammering in my chest. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I took the exit, the car bumping along the poorly maintained service road. My mind raced, trying to figure a way out of this situation. I could try to grab the knife, but at these speeds, that could end in a crash that would kill us both. Keep driving, Mike instructed, his voice tight with tension. And don't try anything stupid. We drove in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The service road wound through increasingly rugged terrain, the scrubland giving way to rocky outcroppings. Finally, Mike spoke again. Pull over here. I did as I was told, bringing the car to a stop in a small clearing surrounded by large boulders. The engine ticked as it cooled in the rapidly chilling desert air. Get out, Mike ordered, gesturing with the knife. On shaky legs, I exited the car. Mike followed, keeping the knife trained on me. Walk, he said, nodding towards a narrow path leading between two towering rocks. As we walked, the reality of my situation began to sink in. We were miles from anywhere. No one knew where I was, and I was at the mercy of a man with a knife and God knows what intentions. Listen, Mike, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Whatever's going on, we can figure this out. You don't have to. Shut up, he hissed, jabbing the knife towards me. Just keep walking. We emerged into another clearing, this one dominated by the rusted-out shell of an old trailer. Mike marched me towards it, kicking open the creaky door. Inside, he ordered. The interior of the trailer was a mess of old furniture and debris. The musty smell of long abandonment filled my nostrils. Sit, Mike said, pointing to a rickety chair. As I sat, he began to pace, running his free hand through his hair. He looked like a man on the edge, his eyes wild and unfocused. I'm sorry, he muttered, more to himself than to me. I didn't want it to be like this, but they left me no choice. Who, Mike? I asked cautiously. Who left you no choice? He whirled on me, the knife flashing and the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. You don't understand. They're after me. They've been chasing me for days. I thought I'd lost them, but then I saw that black SUV on the highway, and I knew they'd found me again. My mind reeled. Had I seen a black SUV? Couldn't remember. The highway had been so empty for so long. Mike, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. I didn't see any SUV. I think maybe you're confused, maybe dehydrated from being out in the heat. Why don't we go back to my car? Get some water? And no, he shouted, making me flinch. We can't go back. They'll be waiting. They're always waiting. He resumed his pacing, muttering to himself. I watched him, my fear slowly being replaced by pity. This man wasn't a hardened criminal. He was scared, possibly delusional. Who are they, Mike? I asked softly. He stopped, fixing me with a haunted stare. The ones who want what I found. The ones who'll do anything to keep it secret. What did you find? Mike hesitated, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object clenched tightly in his fist. Slowly, he opened his hand. In his palm sat a small metallic cube no bigger than a die. Its surface was covered in intricate swirling patterns that seemed to shift and move as I looked at them. I found it out in the desert, Mike whispered. At first, I thought it was just some weird rock. But then it showed me things, terrible, wonderful things, the truth about everything. I stared at the cube, mesmerized. The patterns did seem to be moving, forming, and reforming into impossible shapes. Mike, I said, tearing my gaze away from the object. I think that thing might be dangerous. Maybe we should. A sudden noise outside cut me off, the crunch of tires on gravel. Mike's eyes went wide with terror. They're here, he breathed. Before I could react, Mike thrust the cube into my hand. Take it, he whispered urgently. Run. Don't let them get it. Then, without another word, he darted out the back of the trailer. I sat frozen, the cube feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. Outside, I could hear the sharp sound of car doors slamming and voices raised in anger. In that moment, I had to decide. Should I follow Mike's advice and run, or stay and try to explain the madness of it all to whoever was outside? But as my gaze drifted back to the cube, the swirling pattern inside catching my eye, I realized there was no choice to be made. Some primal instinct deep within me screamed that this object could not fall into the wrong hands. I pocketed it quickly and began to search for another way out of the trailer. There had to be an escape route, some hidden path through the rocks. As the voices drew nearer, my pulse quickened, and I searched desperately. Whatever trouble Mike had gotten himself into, I was now tangled in it too. And deep down, I knew my life would never be the same again. As I found a small window at the back and squeezed through, dropping silently to the ground outside, one thought rang out in my mind. I should have kept driving when I saw that thumb on the side of the road. But it was too late for second thoughts. The chase had begun, and I was running from shadows I couldn't even begin to comprehend.